Hi guys, and welcome to Relaxation Bedtime History. Tonight we step quietly into Whitehall Palace in the year 1540 when the Thames is dark beneath the evening sky. Torchlight flickers against brick walls, and somewhere beyond a guarded doorway. Henry VIII is being served by people who know that a careless word can travel faster than a royal barge. You hear horses stamping near the approach, servants calling softly to one another, and boats knocking against wooden landing stages along the river. The palace ahead does not resemble one neat building. It spreads outward in chambers, courtyards, galleries, gardens, service rooms, gates, stairways, and passages that seem determined to confuse anyone without a guide. And if you arrive here expecting peaceful royal luxury, you probably won't survive this place socially for more than an afternoon. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you are settling in, tell me where you are listening from and what time it is there. It is always strangely comforting to imagine all those different rooms, cities, and quiet corners sharing the same story. Now, dim the lights and follow the river toward the palace. The Thames is the easiest way to approach Whitehall. Roads through Tudor London can be slow, muddy, crowded, and unpleasant, while the river functions almost like a broad royal highway. Barges move steadily along the water, carrying officials, goods, nobles, servants, letters, food, and occasionally people important enough to make everyone else wait. Your small boat glides closer to the palace frontage. Water laps against the hull. The smell is a complicated mixture of wet timber, smoke, mud, fish, and the less romantic contributions of a large city that has not yet discovered modern sewage treatment. Nobody is bottling this as a Tudor fragrance. Ahead, Whitehall rises beside the river in a long, irregular collection of buildings. By 1540 it has become one of Henry VIII's principal residences. The king acquired much of the property from Cardinal Thomas Wolsey after Wolsey's dramatic fall from royal favour in 1529, and Henry expanded the complex into a palace suited to a monarch increasingly determined to display authority. That transformation is important. You're not simply entering a comfortable home. You're entering a political machine built partly from architecture. Every doorway tells you who may pass. Every chamber announces rank. Every courtyard separates one group from another. Every guard quietly reminds you that access to the king is itself a form of power. The boat reaches a landing point, and you step carefully onto damp timber. Your shoes immediately encounter mud. Excellent. The glamour begins. Nearby, servants unload baskets and barrels. A man carrying a sack of flour bends beneath its weight. Another balances bundles of firewood. Two boys hurry past with covered containers, moving quickly enough to suggest that someone higher in the household has already complained. You follow the flow toward one of the entrances. The palace is busy even before you pass inside. Horses arrive carrying gentlemen whose clothing announces wealth long before their names are spoken. Lesser officials linger near gateways hoping for instructions. Petitioners wait for opportunities to approach someone who might eventually approach someone important. That chain of access can define careers. The Tudor court is not merely where the king lives. It is where influence gathers. A recognizable feature of Henry VIII's reign is the extraordinary importance of proximity to the monarch. To serve near the king, particularly within the privy chamber or other intimate household spaces, can provide access to information and favour unavailable to people standing only a few rooms farther away. Distance, here, is political. You pass beneath a guarded entrance. The sound changes immediately. Outside, the river and horses dominate. Inside, footsteps echo against hard surfaces, voices become softer, doors open and close. Somewhere above you, furniture scrapes across a floor. From another direction comes the faint metallic clatter of kitchen equipment. The air smells of rushes, wood smoke, wool, wax, damp clothing, and human beings living together in quantities modern palace visitors rarely imagine. Whitehall is crowded, very crowded. The popular image of a royal palace often gives everyone elegant personal space. In reality, Tudor households are packed with people, officers, cooks, clerks, gentlemen, laundresses, guards, musicians, messengers, priests, craftsmen, grooms, pages, and visiting courtiers all require somewhere to stand, work, eat, wait, sleep, or quietly block your path while pretending they are not blocking your path. You enter a courtyard. The surrounding buildings seem to have grown rather than been designed. Windows differ in size. Roof lines meet awkwardly. Covered passages connect structures built at different times. Whitehall expands gradually, swallowing older residences and adapting them to royal requirements. The result is impressive, but not always tidy. An unusual detail survives in descriptions of Tudor palace life rooms can change purpose depending on circumstance. A chamber that hosts formal business one day might accommodate waiting attendants, storage, or temporary sleeping arrangements at another time. Royal architecture is prestigious, certainly, but it is also surprisingly flexible. You cross the courtyard as a group of servants carrying folded cloth passes nearby. One glances at you, not suspiciously, more accurately. He is trying to determine whether you matter. People here become skilled at reading clothing, posture, companions, badges, and behaviour. Status must be recognised quickly. Address the wrong person too casually and you appear insolent. Bow deeply to someone unimportant and you appear foolish. Ignore a senior officer and perhaps your day becomes inconvenient. The palace is a school of tiny social calculations. You continue into a covered passage. The light dims. Small windows allow narrow strips of daylight to fall across plaster and timber. Where candles or lamps are used, wax and tallow create their own faint smells. Shadows gather in corners. You begin to notice the constant movement. A messenger comes toward you carrying folded papers. He presses them close to his chest. Letters matter enormously in the Tudor world. News travels through people, paper, seals, and spoken reports. A message delivered late can alter negotiations. A rumour delivered early can alter reputations. You step aside. Behind him comes a gentleman accompanied by two servants. No one explains who he is. That is another feature of court life. You are expected to know. Whitehall in 1540 exists at a particularly tense moment in Henry VIII's reign. The king has already broken with papal authority. Monasteries across England have been dissolved. Thomas Cromwell has risen to extraordinary power. And political alliances can shift with remarkable speed. Historians continue to disagree over exactly how much Henry personally directs the daily machinery of factional court politics, compared with how often ministers and competing groups shape the information reaching him. From your position in the corridor, the distinction feels academic. Everyone behaves as though Henry's opinion matters immediately, because it does. A sudden silence spreads near a doorway ahead. People straighten. Someone important is passing. You cannot see the king. Not yet. Instead, several gentlemen emerge first, dressed finely enough to make the surrounding servants seem almost colourless by comparison. Their clothing includes rich fabrics, carefully fitted garments, and decorations intended to be noticed. Behind them comes an officer of the household. Conversation remains restrained until the group has disappeared. Then the corridor breathes again. You realize that the palace has rhythms, noise, pause, movement, waiting, orders, meals. Ceremony, more waiting, Court life requires extraordinary patience. A man may travel miles to Whitehall, stand for hours in uncomfortable clothing, exchange 3 sentences with an official, and consider the day successful. You move onward through an opening. You glimpse another courtyard where stable workers lead horses across the stones. Hooves strike sharply against the ground. A dog darts between 2 men and is immediately called back. Animals are everywhere in Tudor life, though not always in the romantic way later paintings suggest. Horses are transport, status symbols, military necessities, and expensive responsibilities. Dogs may be used for hunting, companionship, guarding, or simply wandering somewhere inconvenient at precisely the wrong moment. One odd courtly habit involves gift-giving through animals. Exotic creatures, prized hunting dogs, and unusual birds can circulate among nobles and monarchs as signs of favour, diplomacy, or prestige. Receiving a rare animal sounds impressive until you remember that someone must feed it. Usually a servant. You turn toward a more formal part of the palace. The surfaces become richer. Hangings soften walls. Better furniture appears. The transition is gradual but unmistakable. You're moving towards spaces associated with greater status. Even temperature can reflect hierarchy. The wealthiest chambers have better fireplaces, thicker textiles, more attendants, and improved protection from drafts. Lesser workers make do with colder corners, shared spaces, and whatever warmth drifts outward from fires maintained for someone more important. You run a hand lightly along a wooden rail. It is smooth from use. Hundreds of hands have touched it before yours. That small sensation makes the palace suddenly less abstract. Whitehall is famous because kings live here, but kings do not carry water. They do not scrub floors. They do not haul barrels from the river. They do not stand in cold gateways through winter nights checking arrivals. The palace exists because thousands of ordinary tasks are completed repeatedly, quietly, and usually without anyone writing them down. That is the hidden Whitehall you have come to see. Not only Henry VIII in embroidered clothing, not only ambassadors bowing beneath painted ceilings, not only ceremonies preserved in chronicles. You're here for the hands lifting coal, the feet climbing narrow stairs, the fingers repairing linen by candlelight, the backs bending beneath baskets, the ears listening carefully whenever important people speak nearby. A bell sounds somewhere deeper inside, almost immediately. Movement increases. Servants turn toward particular passages. A clerk gathers his papers. 2 men carrying a bench maneuver awkwardly around a corner, nearly striking the wall. Royal magnificence, you discover, includes a surprising amount of furniture relocation. You follow them only a short distance before another doorway reveals a long interior passage leading farther into the household. Beyond it lie the rooms visitors rarely imagine. Workrooms, waiting chambers, service stairs, storage spaces, offices, sleeping corners. The ordinary arteries behind royal ceremony, the polished face of Whitehall is already beginning to peel away, and as you step beyond the impressive outer world of gates and courtyards, the palace becomes narrower, busier, warmer, stranger, and far more human. You continue along the passage, leaving behind the larger courtyard and entering the part of Whitehall where royal magnificence depends on people moving quickly through spaces that were never designed for comfort. The corridor narrows. Your shoulder almost brushes a hanging as you step aside for a servant carrying a wooden tray. Behind him comes another man with folded linen balanced against his chest, followed by a page moving at such speed that you briefly wonder whether Tudor boys are trained to walk or simply released into palaces at a permanent light jog. The air feels warmer here, not pleasantly warm, occupied, warm. Too many bodies have passed through these rooms, fires burn somewhere nearby, doors open and close, damp wool dries slowly, and the smells of wax, smoke, food, leather, and human effort settle into the fabric of the building. This is where Whitehall begins to reveal its hidden machinery. You hear a bell, then another. Neither is decorative. A royal household depends on signals, schedules, officers, written instructions, spoken orders, and an enormous number of people knowing where they should be before someone important notices that they are missing. You reach a junction where 3 passages meet. For a moment, you have no idea which way to go. That would be dangerous if you actually belonged here. Palaces like Whitehall are not arranged for tourists. They develop over time through additions, conversions, enclosed yards, galleries, staircases, older buildings, newer structures, and spaces adapted for purposes their original builders never imagined. A servant passes you without hesitation. Of course he knows the way. He has probably walked this route dozens of times today. You follow him. The floor beneath you is uneven in places. Rushes may cover portions of interior floors, sometimes mixed with herbs intended to freshen rooms. Modern imagination occasionally turns this into a picturesque carpet of sweet-smelling greenery. Reality is less enchanted. Rushes collect dust, shoes carry mud, food is dropped, dogs wander, boots scrape. Servants sweep and replace material when required. But a heavily occupied palace is never going to smell like a luxury candle shop called Tudor Meadow. A man kneels beside the wall gathering debris into a small pile. You barely notice him at first. That is part of the problem. The court is designed to draw your eyes toward wealth, rank, and ceremony, while much of the labour maintaining those things happens low to the ground, behind doors, or before dawn. You walk farther. A doorway opens into a chamber where clerks sit near a table covered with papers. The room is quieter than the corridor, quills scratch. Someone reads a document under his breath. Bundles are stacked nearby. Royal government generates paper relentlessly. Orders, accounts, lists, warrants, receipts, petitions, letters, household expenses, records of food, clothing, wages, horses, construction, gifts, and travel. One of the central realities of Tudor monarchy is that the royal household and royal government overlap constantly. Whitehall is both residence and administrative environment. Political decisions are made within a space that also contains kitchens, bedrooms, wardrobes, stables, chapels, and people looking for somewhere to put another barrel. That mixture feels strange to you. Imagine conducting affairs of state while someone in the next passage is arguing about missing napkins. Yet this is normal here. You pause outside the clerk's room. A senior official enters. The men inside rise or adjust themselves immediately. Hierarchy does not disappear because paperwork is boring. Quite the opposite. Even the handling of documents can reflect status. Who receives a message? Who carries it? Whose seal appears upon it? Who is allowed to read it? And how quickly it reaches the king can all matter. Information has geography. The closer you move toward privileged chambers, the more carefully access is controlled. But before reaching that inner world, you must pass through layers of service. A pair of men emerges from another room carrying a chest. It looks heavy enough to contain either royal plate or one extremely stubborn courtier. You step against the wall. They grunt as they pass. Storage is a constant problem in a palace filled with textiles, clothing, plate, furniture, documents, food, fuel, ceremonial objects, weapons, bedding, and countless smaller necessities. Royal households move as well. The king does not remain permanently in Whitehall. Henry travels among residences, and portions of the household may move with him. Transporting royal life requires astonishing organisation. Beds, clothes, cooking equipment, records, furnishings, and supplies may all need to follow. The palace, therefore, contains a culture of packing, counting, carrying, unpacking, checking, and discovering that the object someone desperately needs is apparently in another building. You turn down a side passage. Here the surfaces become simpler. The plaster is less carefully finished. The light is poorer. The people you encounter are dressed more plainly. Status reveals itself architecturally again. The farther you stand from the royal centre, the more practical the environment becomes. A woman carrying folded cloth pauses at a doorway. Another servant counts pieces aloud: sheets, napkins, towels, table linen, clothing. Textiles are among the most labour-intensive possessions in the household. They must be acquired, stored, repaired, cleaned, dried, folded, guarded, issued, and accounted for. A single noble household can consume an extraordinary quantity of cloth. Whitehall operates on another scale entirely. One surviving feature of Tudor household administration is the obsessive attention paid to inventories. Valuable objects are listed because royal possessions represent wealth, status, and responsibility. Losing something is not simply careless. It can become an administrative problem requiring someone to explain why the king appears to own fewer silver vessels than he did last month. You continue. A small door opens suddenly and nearly hits you. A young page freezes. You freeze. He bows quickly, guesses that you may outrank him, and hurries away. You decide not to correct him. This may be your most successful moment at court. Pages occupy an interesting position. Many are young, often learning service, manners, and hierarchy while carrying messages or assisting higher-ranking members of the household. Court service can function as education as much as employment, especially for boys from respectable families seeking advancement. They learn by watching, and there is plenty to watch. You pass two gentlemen speaking softly beside a window. Their voices drop further as you approach. You cannot hear the subject, probably wise. Whitehall's passages are full of accidental audiences. Walls have doors. Doors have servants. Servants have ears. A quiet comment made in frustration may travel several chambers before supper. Scholars remain divided over how effectively ordinary household servants participated in the circulation of political rumour. Formal records focus heavily on elite actors. Yet the practical reality of crowded court life makes complete secrecy difficult to imagine. A maid changing linen might hear names. A porter might notice who arrives late. A groom might recognise which nobleman's horse waits outside. A page might carry a message without knowing its meaning. Individually, these are fragments. Together, they create the atmosphere of court. You move onward and encounter another group waiting outside a chamber. They are not doing anything obvious. That is their job at this moment. Waiting occupies an enormous amount of palace time. People wait for orders. They wait for audiences. They wait for meals. They wait for officials. They wait for doors to open. A man standing near the wall adjusts his sleeve. Another studies the floor. Nobody wants to look impatient. Patience, performed correctly, can appear respectful. Patience performed badly looks like resentment. The difference may be only facial expression, beyond them. An officer speaks briefly to someone at the doorway. A name is mentioned. One waiting man immediately straightens and disappears inside. Everyone else remains. You continue before becoming emotionally invested in Tudor queue management. The passage turns again. Now you smell beeswax. Someone is polishing wood in a nearby room. A servant rubs the surface of a chest with a cloth, working methodically. Beside him lies a small collection of brushes and cleaning materials. Maintenance never stops. Smoke darkens walls. Mud enters on shoes. Wax drips. Cloth tears. Wood cracks. Metal tarnishes. Roofs leak. Windows admit drafts. Fires scatter ash. The palace must be repaired continuously simply to remain impressive. There is something comforting about this. Whitehall may represent royal authority, but it still has loose hinges. You pass a carpenter carrying tools. The sound of hammering follows from farther away. An interesting detail recorded in large early modern households is the constant employment of specialist craftsmen, carpenters, joiners, glaziers, plumbers, masons, painters, and others may be summoned for practical maintenance or elaborate decorative projects. A royal residence is never truly finished. There is always another room to alter. Henry VIII particularly enjoys building. His reign sees major expenditure on palaces, hunting lodges, fortifications, and royal residences. Whitehall becomes one of the clearest expressions of that appetite. Yet the grandeur reaches you through small inconveniences. A ladder blocks half the corridor. You squeeze past it. Someone has left a bucket nearby. You nearly strike it with your foot. Royal power, apparently, must occasionally step around wet plaster, farther ahead. The corridor widens into a busier service area. Messengers arrive from several directions. One carries a sealed letter, another speaks rapidly with an officer who shakes his head and points toward another passage. A third stands beside the wall catching his breath. Messages can arrive from London, from government officials, from diplomatic contacts, from royal estates, or from distant counties. Some are routine, others can alter careers. The messenger rarely knows which is which. You notice that speed matters. A trusted servant who can deliver information discreetly is valuable. A careless one is dangerous. Communication in 1540 may move slowly compared with your world. But inside Whitehall, urgency feels very modern. Everyone wants an answer immediately. They simply do not have email to make it worse. You enter another passage where domestic activity presses closer. A woman carries candles. A boy holds a basket containing pieces of bread. Two men argue quietly about a delivery. A porter checks an item against a written list. You begin to understand that the palace is less like a grand house and more like a small town compressed behind royal walls. Hundreds of needs overlap. People eat, sleep, work, pray, carry, clean, repair, wait, report, guard, count, and complain, probably especially complain. What seems effortless from the ceremonial rooms depends on endless coordination here. The king enters a chamber and finds it warm because someone fetched fuel. He receives clean linen because several people handled it before it reached his hands. He eats from polished plate because someone counted, cleaned, transported, and guarded it. He receives a letter because riders, boatmen, clerks, messengers, and officers moved it across the kingdom and through these passages. Nothing royal is actually effortless. Effort is simply hidden. As you walk deeper into Whitehall, the crowds begin to thin, the doors become more carefully watched. The people standing nearby seem increasingly conscious of who is permitted to proceed. You sense another boundary approaching. The palace machine continues behind you with its footsteps, bells, whispers, sweeping, carrying, and scratching quills. Ahead lies a quieter region, a guarded region. The chambers closest to Henry himself, and the closer you move toward the king, the more valuable every doorway becomes. The passage grows quieter as you approach the king's private apartments. Not silent. Whitehall is almost never silent, but the kind of noise changes. Behind you, the palace still hums with carts, servants, messengers, clerks, buckets, doors, and the occasional unfortunate piece of furniture being dragged somewhere it clearly does not wish to go. Ahead, voices are lower, footsteps become more deliberate. Men stand near entrances rather than rushing through them. You feel the difference immediately. This is the geography of access. A royal palace does not simply separate public rooms from private ones. It creates layers. Each doorway filters people according to rank, office, favour, duty, and sometimes simple luck. The closer you come to Henry VIII, the fewer people are allowed to continue. You pass a chamber where several gentlemen wait. Their clothing is rich, but not equally rich. That matters. One wears velvet trimmed with expensive fur, another has sleeves decorated with careful embroidery, a third appears almost modest beside them, though his clothing would still cost more than many ordinary families might earn in a very long time. Nobody speaks loudly. A servant crosses the room carrying a covered cup. Every eye briefly follows him. Not because the cup is exciting, because it is going toward the king at Whitehall. Direction itself can be interesting. If someone is walking toward Henry, you notice. If someone is leaving Henry, you notice even more. A face can become evidence. Did he look pleased? Was he pale? Did he speak to anyone? Did he leave quickly? Court politics can begin with questions exactly this small. You move closer to another doorway. A gentleman stationed nearby watches you carefully. You slow down. This is not the place to improvise confidence. The Privy Chamber lies at the centre of Henry's intimate court life. Access to these spaces is deliberately restricted, especially after reforms earlier in the reign sought to control who could approach the monarch directly. Men serving within the Privy Chamber can become extraordinarily influential because they see Henry when he is less formally surrounded by the larger court. That proximity has practical value. A minister may possess high office, a nobleman may own vast estates, but the gentleman who hands Henry a shirt in the morning may have something both men desperately want: his ear. You are permitted to continue, for now. The chamber beyond feels more comfortable than the service corridors. The walls carry textiles that soften sound and help reduce drafts. Furniture is better made. Cushions appear. Light reflects from polished surfaces. A fire burns with enough fuel to suggest that no one here has been told to conserve firewood. Status has temperature again. You stand near the edge of the room. Henry is not present. Even his absence dominates the space. Everything is arranged around the possibility that he may enter. People wait with attention. A servant adjusts a cloth on a table. Another checks a vessel. A gentleman speaks quietly to an officer and then takes his place near the wall. Nobody sprawls. Nobody yawns openly. Nobody asks whether this meeting could have been an email. The rhythm of court life may be slow, but the need to appear ready is constant. You look toward a door leading farther inward. Beyond it lie chambers associated with even greater privacy. The terminology of Tudor royal apartments can be confusing because rooms change over time and records do not always describe spaces in exactly the same way. Historians still argue over the precise arrangement and use of some Whitehall interiors during different phases of Henry's reign, especially because later rebuilding and the eventual destruction of much of the palace complicate reconstruction. For you, standing here in 1540, the architectural uncertainty feels strangely appropriate. Even contemporary visitors may not understand every room. They only know where they are allowed to stop. You move with a small group into another chamber. Here, the sense of intimacy becomes stronger. A chair stands near the fire. A table holds several personal objects. Textiles create visual warmth. A window admits pale daylight from outside. You catch the faint scent of wax, smoke, perfume, and something medicinal. Henry VIII is 48 years old in 1540. The athletic young prince celebrated earlier in his reign has changed dramatically. He is heavier now. His mobility is more difficult. The leg injuries that have troubled him for years contribute to periods of pain and reduced activity. His physical condition affects the atmosphere of the household because royal health is never merely personal. If the king sleeps badly, other people may have a bad morning. If he is in pain, petitioners may wait. If he is cheerful, someone may decide that today is the perfect moment to request land. A monarchy turns mood into scheduling. You hear movement beyond the door. Several men straighten at once. Then Henry appears. You have seen portraits. They do not prepare you for presence. He is broad. His clothing amplifies his size rather than hiding it. Rich fabric, fur, jewels, decorative slashing, and carefully constructed garments create the visual language of authority. Everything about the presentation says that this is a man who possesses resources other people cannot imagine. He moves slowly, not weakly, slowly. There is a difference, and everyone in the room understands it. A gentleman steps forward. Another remains close enough to assist if needed, but not so close that the assistance looks obvious. That balance is delicate. A king must be served. A king must not appear dependent. You lower your gaze appropriately. Henry speaks to one of the men near him. His voice is conversational. That surprises you. Power does not always sound dramatic. Sometimes it asks an ordinary question in a quiet room and causes 6 people to remember the answer for the rest of the day. The exchange concerns a horse. Nothing political, at least. Nothing obviously political. Henry has long been interested in hunting, riding, weaponry, music, architecture, theology, and sport, even as his health limits some activities. His personal interests remain part of court life. The discussion lasts less than a minute, yet afterward. 2 gentlemen glance at each other. Perhaps the horse belongs to someone important. Perhaps they simply both like horses at court. Uncertainty is exhausting. Henry settles into the chair. A servant approaches with a drink. The vessel is handled carefully. Food and drink closest to the monarch can pass through controlled procedures involving trusted servants. Fear of poisoning exists throughout European courts, though popular imagination sometimes exaggerates the constant use of elaborate tests for every mouthful. Still, caution matters. Royal bodies are political bodies. One unusual custom associated with royal service is the elaborate ceremonial treatment of ordinary personal actions. Dressing, washing, eating, and retiring to bed can become structured opportunities for attendance and status. Something as simple as helping the king with clothing may mark a servant as unusually privileged. Your morning routine probably does not determine national politics. Henry's can. He drinks. Conversation resumes. A gentleman introduces a matter concerning an appointment. The tone remains respectful. Henry listens. You notice how everyone else listens too. Not obviously. That would be rude. Instead, they become very interested in the fire, the floor, a table, or their own sleeves. Nobody is listening. Everyone is listening. The king gives a short reply. The matter is finished, or perhaps it has only begun. You begin to understand why access matters so much. Formal councils can debate. Documents can be prepared. Ministers can recommend. But a few words spoken in a private chamber may shift how Henry views a person or proposal. The men closest to him therefore occupy a strange position. They are servants, but they are also potential intermediaries. Someone unable to reach the king directly may approach one of them. A favour might be requested. A petition might be mentioned. A name might be introduced at exactly the right moment. This creates competition. Court factions are not political parties in your modern sense. They are shifting networks of family, friendship, patronage, religion, ambition, office, and personal access. In 1540, these networks are especially tense. Thomas Cromwell remains one of the most powerful men in England at this moment, but his position is becoming unstable. His role in arranging Henry's marriage to Anne of Cleves, along with growing political opposition, has left him vulnerable. You do not know yet just how quickly events will move. That is one of history's cruel little advantages over the people living through it. You know what comes next. They do not. Henry turns toward another gentleman. A joke is made. Several people laugh, not too loudly. Court laughter is probably calibrated like everything else. The king smiles. Relief softens the room. For several minutes, the atmosphere becomes almost domestic. That is the strange thing about private monarchy. Henry can appear as ruler, employer, patient, husband, companion, patron, and ordinary man within the same hour. The roles overlap. You notice a small dog near the edge of the chamber. It lies quietly on a cushion, apparently unimpressed by constitutional significance. Small companion dogs are popular among elite women and men in Tudor courts. Though surviving references often make it difficult to identify exact breeds in modern terms, animals can move through private spaces more freely than many people. The dog yawns, possibly the safest political statement available. A servant tends the fire, another waits near the door. The labour remains almost invisible. You watch Henry speak, and your attention naturally follows him. But then you deliberately look away. That is when you begin to see the private household itself. A man standing behind the chair, another guarding the threshold, someone waiting with cloth, someone carrying a message, someone checking the room, someone preparing for the next movement before the king has finished the current one. Royal privacy is crowded privacy. Henry is rarely alone. Even moments that feel personal are surrounded by attendants. The idea of absolute private solitude would be difficult for a Tudor monarch. Security, service, ceremony, and expectation keep other people constantly nearby. That may be luxurious. It may also be exhausting. You imagine waking each morning while several men wait to help you dress. You imagine eating while people watch. You imagine becoming irritated and knowing that half the room will remember exactly how irritated you looked. Royal privilege comes with very little anonymity. Henry rises again. Assistance is available without being made conspicuous. The room responds instantly. Conversation stops. Bodies adjust. A door is opened. He moves toward the next chamber. You remain behind. The shift happens almost immediately. The room that felt charged with significance becomes simply a room again. A servant approaches the chair. Another straightens the table. Someone retrieves an object left nearby. Life resets around the absence of the king. You look toward the doorway through which Henry disappeared. You have now seen the central secret of Whitehall. Power here is not only displayed in grand halls, it is managed in small rooms, in waiting, in timing, in who stands close enough to speak, and tomorrow morning, before Henry appears before ministers, ambassadors, or petitioners, another intimate ritual will begin here. Shirts will be prepared, shoes will be brought, jewels will be selected, fabric will be brushed. Hands will fasten, lift, tie, adjust, and arrange the body of the king until Henry VIII is transformed once again into the public image everyone expects to see. The transformation begins before the king has fully entered the day. You remain near the inner apartments as servants move with the quiet efficiency of people who know that clothing here is not simply clothing. It is rank, authority, wealth, ceremony, and political theatre stitched into fabric. A folded shirt arrives first. It is clean linen, carefully handled. Another servant carries stockings, someone else brings shoes. Nearby, richer garments wait in layers, each piece selected according to weather, occasion, royal preference, and the expectations of everyone who may see Henry later. You begin to understand that dressing the king is not one task. It is a sequence, and sequences at court create opportunities. The men permitted to assist with intimate royal dressing occupy unusually privileged positions. Their service places them physically close to Henry at moments when the room is smaller. Conversation can be less formal, and the king may speak before the machinery of public business fully surrounds him. A shirt is lifted. Henry raises his arms. The fabric settles over him. The action itself is ordinary. The circumstances are not. In Tudor court culture, access to the royal body carries meaning. Those who assist with dressing, washing, or other personal routines are trusted in ways that extend beyond domestic convenience. You watch a gentleman smooth the linen, another adjust the collar. No movement is hurried. Henry's physical comfort matters, but so does appearance. The king has cultivated an image of magnificence for decades. Earlier in his reign, observers repeatedly commented on his athleticism, height, energy, and elaborate clothing. By 1540 age, weight and recurring leg problems have altered his body, but presentation remains powerful. Clothes help manage what time has changed. A padded garment begins to take shape around his torso. The silhouette becomes broader. Shoulders seem wider. The body appears more imposing. This is not accidental. Men's elite fashion in Henry's court often emphasizes breadth across the chest and shoulders, layers, structured garments, fur, embroidery, and rich materials create a visual language of masculine authority. You take a moment to imagine the practical result. Several layers, heavy cloth, warm rooms, fires nearby, crowded chambers. Tudor elegance is occasionally just sweating with excellent posture. A servant approaches carrying a richer outer garment. The fabric catches the light. Velvet, expensive, deeply coloured. Colour itself can communicate status because high-quality dyes require labour, imported materials, specialised knowledge, or costly processing. Sumptuary laws in Tudor England attempt to regulate who may wear certain fabrics, furs, and styles, linking dress directly to social hierarchy. You do not merely wear what looks good, you wear what your rank permits, or, if you're bold enough, what you hope nobody challenges. The garment is placed carefully around Henry. Hands move over seams, closures are checked, a sleeve is adjusted. Someone steps back and studies the overall effect. The king becomes less like the tired man you saw near the chair, and more like the monumental figure familiar from royal portraiture. Clothing performs restoration. It turns discomfort into majesty. You notice that several attendants participate without appearing to crowd him. That requires practice. One holds an item ready before it is requested. Another removes something the instant it is no longer needed. A third waits with a cloth. The choreography is subtle. Good service often means anticipating the next action. Bad service means being noticed. You suspect that being noticed for the wrong reason near Henry VIII is not a career development strategy. A pair of shoes is presented. They are well made, but their practical design must accommodate the king's condition. Henry's injured legs are already an important concern by this period. Contemporary accounts and later medical speculation have generated many interpretations of his declining health, though certainty remains elusive because diagnosis across 5 centuries is difficult. Some researchers have proposed diabetes, vascular problems, chronic infection, endocrine disorders, or combinations of conditions. Others caution that surviving descriptions are too incomplete to support confident retrospective diagnosis. The exact medical explanation remains unsettled. The daily consequence does not. His attendants have to work around pain. Movement must be managed. Clothing must fit a changing body. Long ceremonies become harder. A royal wardrobe must adapt without admitting that adaptation is necessary. The shoes are secured. Henry says something quietly to one of the men beside him. The response comes with a small smile. You cannot hear the words. That seems appropriate. Some of the most influential conversations in Whitehall are likely never written down. A belt follows. Then decorative elements. Jewellery appears in a small container held with considerable care. Gold catches the firelight. Stones flash briefly. Jewels at court are not merely ornaments. They can function as portable wealth, diplomatic gifts, inherited objects, symbols of office, and visible proof of magnificence. A jewel worn today may have passed through several hands before reaching the king. It may later be gifted, reset, pawned, altered, or incorporated into another object. Royal splendour is surprisingly mobile. You watch a piece fastened into place. Another attendant checks its position. Nothing should hang incorrectly. Portraits have trained you to think that Tudor clothing naturally arranges itself into perfect geometry. It does not. Someone has to fix it, repeatedly. Henry turns slightly. The men around him assess the effect. A hat is brought forward. Headwear matters enormously in elite male dress. Caps decorated with jewels, feathers, badges, or other embellishments can complete the visual impression of status. Henry takes the cap. For a moment, he appears almost to inspect it himself. Then it is set properly. The figure in the room becomes unmistakable. Not merely Henry, the king. The distinction matters. Royal identity is performed through objects, fabric, gold, fur, colour, posture, space, attendance. All these things combine to create authority before Henry says a word. You look around and notice another layer of work hidden behind the immediate dressing ritual. Every garment has a history of labour. Someone acquired the cloth, someone cut it, someone stitched it, someone embroidered it, someone stored it, someone brushed it, someone repaired it, someone checked it for damage, someone packed it when the court moved, someone unpacked it when the king returned. Luxury does not reduce labour, it multiplies it. A wardrobe officer enters carrying a note. The royal wardrobe is not a single closet in the modern sense. It is part administrative office, part storage system, part workshop network, and part accounting problem. Detailed records are necessary because clothing is extremely valuable. Fine velvet, silk, cloth of gold, fur, lace, embroidery, and jewels represent enormous expense. The Tudor monarchy spends heavily on appearance because appearance communicates power. Foreign ambassadors notice what Henry wears. Courtiers notice. Rivals notice and servants notice. Nobody standing near the king can pretend clothing is irrelevant. You move closer to a side table. Several small containers rest there. Perfumed preparations may be used on clothing. Linens, gloves, or personal objects. Tudor elites appreciate scents such as rose, musk, ambergris, violet, and various herbal mixtures. The palace itself provides plenty of reasons to enjoy perfume. Smoke, sweat, animals, damp cloth, open drains, cooking, crowded rooms. A pleasant scent is not merely decorative, it is tactical. One slightly strange feature of elite 16th century life is the enthusiasm for perfumed gloves. Scented gloves become fashionable luxury objects across European courts, blending clothing, fragrance, and gift exchange into one surprisingly specific form of display. You imagine receiving a pair, elegant, expensive, and almost certainly impossible to wash in the way you would expect. A servant lifts a small cloth containing a fragrant substance. Henry appears accustomed to the routine. Nothing here seems novel to him. That familiarity is what makes the scene so revealing. To you. The ritual feels theatrical. To the people performing it. This is Tuesday. Another layer of fabric is adjusted. A fastening resists. For perhaps 3 seconds. The entire machinery of royal magnificence pauses because one tiny piece of clothing refuses to cooperate. A servant corrects it. History resumes. You almost smile. This is the kind of moment official portraits omit. Henry glances toward a mirror. Glass mirrors exist in elite households, though large. Perfectly clear mirrors like modern ones are difficult and expensive to produce. Polished metal also remains in use for reflective surfaces. The reflection would not have the flawless brightness you expect. Perhaps that is merciful before breakfast. Henry studies his appearance briefly. Does he see himself as older? Does he compare this body with the athletic prince of earlier decades? No record can answer what passes through his mind in such a private instant. What can be seen is that the public image remains carefully maintained, and by 1540 that image matters more than ever. England has experienced years of religious upheaval. Court factions remain tense. Foreign diplomacy shifts constantly. The king's marriages have become matters of state. The body beneath the velvet may be troubled, but the figure presented to the world must still communicate control. The attendants finish. A final adjustment is made at the shoulder. The cap sits correctly. Jewels lie where they should. Fabric falls into deliberate lines. Henry steps forward. The room changes around him. Servants withdraw just enough. Gentlemen prepare to follow. Someone opens the next door. You see again how carefully privacy turns into publicity. Only minutes earlier, men were lifting linen over Henry's head. Now the completed monarch moves toward rooms where others will wait for his attention. The dressing ritual has done more than cover a body. It has assembled authority as Henry leaves. You remain behind with those who must deal with everything he no longer needs. A discarded cloth is collected. Containers are closed. Unused items are returned. A servant checks whether anything has been misplaced. The king moves onward. The labour remains, and beyond these private chambers, another enormous operation is already reaching its hottest, loudest hour. Fires are burning, knives are working, dough is rising, barrels are being opened, meat is being carried. Hundreds of mouths will expect to be fed before the day is done. You follow the smell. The smell reaches you before the heat does. Roasting meat, wood smoke, warm bread, boiling broth, onions, ale, rendered fat, and beneath all of it, the unmistakable scent of a workplace where hundreds of meals are being produced without refrigeration, electric lighting, stainless steel, or anything remotely resembling a health inspection. You descend toward Whitehall's kitchens. The atmosphere changes almost at once. The private apartments depended on quiet anticipation. Here, anticipation has been replaced by noise. Knives strike boards, pots knock against stone, logs crack inside fires. Men call instructions across rooms. Water splashes into buckets. A dog barks somewhere nearby and is answered by a cook who clearly does not appreciate its contribution. Heat presses against your face. You step farther inside. The royal kitchens occupy a world of their own. Whitehall must feed not only Henry and a small circle of intimates, but a vast household of officers, servants, courtiers, guards, craftsmen, clerks, attendants, visitors, and workers whose entitlement to meals varies according to rank and duty. Not everyone eats the same food, not everyone eats in the same place, and certainly not everyone receives the same quantity. Hierarchy follows you all the way to the dinner bowl. A servant passes carrying a basket of bread. You flatten yourself against the wall. Behind him comes another man with a large wooden platter. Then a boy dragging a bundle of kindling nearly as large as he is. The work begins long before anything reaches a table. Fuel has to arrive. Water must be carried. Animals must be slaughtered and butchered. Grain must be milled. Bread must be baked. Fish must be cleaned. Vegetables must be washed. Spices must be stored and measured. Ale must be brewed or supplied. Utensils must be scrubbed, and the fires themselves demand constant attention. You look toward one of the hearths. The flames are enormous. A man stands nearby turning a spit loaded with meat. His face shines with sweat. He shifts his weight from one foot to the other, never moving far from the heat. Roasting is skilled work. The meat must be positioned properly, turned regularly, and judged by experience rather than by a digital thermometer politely announcing that dinner is ready. The cook watches the surface. He listens to the fat hiss. He judges the smell. Years of repetition live in those small decisions. Large Tudor households employ highly organised kitchen departments, and royal provision is particularly complex. Different officers may oversee meat, poultry, baked goods, beverages, spices, storage, and the accounting behind all of it. The kitchen is not simply a room full of cooks, it is an institution. You move past a table where several men are cutting meat into portions. Their knives are heavy and sharp. Bones crack beneath controlled blows. The pace is efficient rather than frantic. These men know what must be prepared and approximately when it must leave the kitchen. A late dish is not merely inconvenient. If it is destined for someone important, lateness can become visible, and visibility, as you have already learned, is risky. You notice a clerk nearby. Of course there is a clerk. There is always a clerk. He's checking quantities against a list. Royal eating creates mountains of paperwork. Purchases, deliveries, allowances, inventories, and consumption all have to be recorded because food represents a huge portion of household expenditure. Historians can reconstruct surprising details of court diet precisely because administrators were so determined to count things. The clerk makes another mark. Somewhere in the future, a researcher will be grateful. The cook is less impressed. He wants his onions. You follow the smell toward another work area. Large pots sit above fires or embers, inside one. A thick stew bubbles slowly. Another contains broth. A servant stirs with a long wooden implement that resembles something between a spoon and agricultural equipment. The liquid turns heavily. Steam rises. You lean away. Your face is already warm enough. Nearby, herbs are being chopped. Parsley, sage, perhaps thyme. Tudor cooking makes considerable use of herbs and spices. Though access varies by wealth, in royal kitchens, imported spices such as pepper, cinnamon, cloves, ginger, mace, and nutmeg can appear regularly. Older popular stories sometimes claim that medieval and Tudor cooks used spices mainly to disguise rotten meat. That explanation does not fit the evidence very well. Spices are expensive. Using costly pepper to rescue spoiled beef would be rather like pouring vintage champagne over a stale sandwich. The wealthy use spices because they enjoy them, because they display access to international trade, and because contemporary taste favours complex combinations that may seem surprising to you. Sweet and savoury ingredients often share the same dish. Sugar may appear with meat. Dried fruit can accompany sauces. Vinegar and spices create sharp flavours. Your modern palate would recognise some combinations and stare suspiciously at others. You continue toward the bakery. The smell becomes gentler here. Warm flour, yeast, fresh crust. For a moment, the kitchen almost becomes comforting. Loaves are being shaped and moved toward ovens. Bread is fundamental to the household. Its quality reflects rank. Fine white bread made from carefully sifted wheat flour is associated with wealth. While darker and coarser breads are common lower down the social scale, even bread announces hierarchy. You look at a row of finished loaves cooling on boards. They are not uniform in the modern commercial sense. Some sit slightly higher, some lean, some have darker crusts. They look unmistakably handmade. A baker checks one by tapping its surface. Satisfied, he moves on. From another doorway comes the smell of brewing. Ale is a basic component of daily consumption across much of Tudor society. Water is certainly drunk, despite the old myth that everyone avoids it completely. But ale provides calories, flavour, and a familiar staple in many households. Strength varies. Not every cup is designed to leave a servant singing under a table by noon. Small beer and weaker ales can form part of ordinary provisioning. You watch barrels being moved. They are heavy. Two men roll one carefully across the floor. The barrel begins to drift sideways. Both men correct it at once. For 3 seconds. The entire beverage supply appears ready to escape toward the doorway. It is recovered. The monarchy survives. You move toward a cooler storage area. The temperature drops slightly. Here, food must be protected from animals, damp, theft, and simple spoilage. There are no refrigerators. Preservation depends on salting, drying, smoking, pickling, careful storage, and seasonal planning. Fish may arrive salted or dried. Meat can be preserved in various ways. Cheese stores well. Grain can last if kept dry and protected from pests. The practical knowledge behind preservation is immense. A royal kitchen may look abundant, but abundance does not remove vulnerability. A bad delivery matters. A spoiled barrel matters. A shortage matters. Court residence places pressure on the surrounding supply network because hundreds of people consume food every day. Whitehall's location near London and the Thames gives it enormous logistical advantages. Boats can bring heavy goods directly toward the palace. Markets provide access to meat, fish, grain, vegetables, fruit, dairy products, and imported luxuries. The river you used to arrive is also carrying dinner. You return toward the hotter rooms. A servant brings in poultry. Chickens and other birds appear regularly in elite dining, while more prestigious game birds can carry special status. Peacock has become almost legendary in popular descriptions of medieval feasts. Although it is hardly an everyday item, presentation can matter as much as taste at the highest levels, and elaborate dishes sometimes exist to impress rather than simply satisfy hunger. There are records across elite European dining culture of cooked birds being presented with feathers restored for spectacle. You picture the effort. Pluck bird, cook bird, then somehow make bird look as though none of this has happened. Courtly cuisine occasionally has the energy of an unnecessarily complicated school project. A shout draws your attention. A cook wants more charcoal. Another demands a missing pan. A boy runs towards storage. Someone else arrives carrying a tray of pies. Pies are practical. A pastry case can hold meat, fruit, or other fillings, protect food during cooking, and create an impressive finished dish. Not every crust is necessarily treated as something you enthusiastically eat. Very thick pastry shells can function partly as cooking containers. You watch one pie being checked. The crust is golden and heavily decorated. This one is clearly intended for a higher table. Nothing about it looks accidental. You begin to see how social rank is assembled in food just as it was assembled in clothing. Better ingredients, more labour, more decoration, more expensive spices, more careful presentation, more servants between kitchen and diner. The highest status meal is not simply larger, it has travelled through more hands. Near another hearth, fish is being prepared. Religious observance shapes Tudor diets significantly because designated fasting days restrict meat consumption and encourage alternatives such as fish. Yet the religious landscape in 1540 is complicated. England has broken from Rome, but many traditional practices remain in place, and Henry's own theology is far more conservative than later Protestant developments might suggest. Exactly how rapidly ordinary household routines change during these years remains a matter of interpretation. Records reveal official requirements more easily than private habits, and historians continue to examine how consistently reform affected daily eating across different communities. Here in Whitehall, practical needs coexist with religious rules, whatever theology says. Hundreds of people still expect supper. You pass a small pile of kitchen scraps. Nothing useful is wasted casually. Bones can flavour broth, fat can be rendered, bread can be reused, leftovers may be redistributed according to household practice. What does not return to elite tables may still feed servants, animals, or others connected to the palace. The grand meal therefore produces its own secondary economy. Food moves downward through rank, not always generously, but rarely without value. You notice several boys working near a washing area. Pots are being scrubbed. Grease clings stubbornly. Hot water is precious because someone has to heat it. Ash, sand, cloths, and vigorous scraping all play roles in cleaning cookware and surfaces. This is the least glamorous corner of a royal dining. No ambassador praises the man who scrubs yesterday's fat from a pot. Yet without him, tomorrow's dinner becomes extremely unpleasant. The kitchen is full of invisible importance. You stand still for a moment. Around you, the whole system moves. Fire, water, meat, bread, ale, spices, hands, accounts, orders, heat. You realise that feeding Whitehall is one of the largest daily performances in the palace, and almost none of the diners will see it. They will see polished dishes, clean cloth, arranged courses, servants entering at the correct moment. The chaos will disappear before the food reaches them. That is the purpose. Royal comfort depends on hiding the work required to produce it. A bell sounds. Several servants immediately begin lifting prepared dishes. The change is dramatic. Food that has spent hours being cut, boiled, roasted, baked, seasoned, checked, and shouted about is suddenly ready to leave. You follow. The heat fades behind you. The smell of smoke remains in your clothes. Ahead, corridors open toward dining chambers where rank will determine who sits, who stands, who serves, what is eaten, and what happens to everything left behind. Dinner is about to become politics again. The dishes leave the kitchens in careful procession. Heat follows them into the corridor. You walk behind a pair of servants carrying covered platters, and the palace suddenly feels like a series of checkpoints between fire and table. At every doorway, someone knows where the food is going, who is entitled to receive it, and whether it should continue toward a prestigious chamber or turn toward a more ordinary dining space. A meal at Whitehall is never simply a meal. It is an arrangement of rank. The food itself already carries hierarchy, but so does the manner in which it travels. Better dishes move toward better rooms. More important diners are served by more important attendants. The distance between kitchen and mouth is filled with social meaning. You enter a chamber where preparations are nearly complete. A cloth covers the table. Metal vessels reflect the light. Servants move around the room, checking places, cups, napkins, and serving equipment. Nothing is casual. Even the placement of objects follows established expectations. A senior servant watches the room with the expression of a man who has spent years learning that one missing spoon can become a crisis if the wrong person notices. You stay close to the wall. This is a safer position. The table is not necessarily laid out in the modern style of one complete place setting for each diner. Tudor dining customs differ considerably from your own. Knives and spoons are common, while forks remain unusual in England for much of this period, and do not yet hold the ordinary place they will later acquire. People may bring personal knives. Food can be shared from common dishes. Bread may serve practical roles beyond simple eating. You glance toward a stack of napkins. Table linen matters enormously. Clean white cloth announces order, wealth, and refinement. Of course, keeping it white inside a smoky palace full of sauces, grease, wine, ale, muddy sleeves, and enthusiastic meat consumption requires the kind of optimism usually associated with people who purchase pale carpets. A servant smooths the cloth anyway. The first diners begin to arrive. They do not simply choose seats. Position follows status. Who sits close to whom can reflect rank, favour, office, and ceremonial expectation. The higher status person occupies the most prestigious place, and everyone else must understand where they belong. You begin to suspect that Tudor social life involves a great deal of knowing exactly where to put yourself. Stand too close and you appear presumptuous. Stand too far away and you may seem insignificant. Sit in the wrong place, and suddenly dinner becomes a constitutional problem. The room settles. Conversation remains controlled as the first dishes enter. A servant approaches with practiced movements. Another follows with drink. You smell roasted meat, warm pastry, herbs, and rich sauces. The presentation is far calmer than anything you witnessed in the kitchen. That is deliberate. The shouting, cutting, sweating, scrubbing, and near escape of the ale barrel have vanished. Dinner arrives looking inevitable. This is one of the most important illusions of elite household life. Service should appear effortless precisely because the effort happened elsewhere. You watch a dish set down. The diners inspect it briefly. Nobody applauds. Nobody asks how long it took. That would be like thanking the palace walls for remaining upright. The work is expected. Royal and aristocratic dining in Tudor England can involve multiple dishes presented in structured courses, though the exact format varies with occasion, rank, season, and household custom. Meat plays a prominent role at wealthy tables, joined by fish, pies, bread, sauces, dairy products, fruit, and sweet preparations. The quantities described in royal household records can look astonishing, but large numbers do not mean Henry personally eats everything listed. A court is a population. Food must pass through many levels of the household. The distinction matters because popular stories about Tudor feasting sometimes turn every accounting entry into evidence that the king sits alone consuming a small farm before dessert. Henry certainly enjoys rich food. He's not personally eating the entire kitchen inventory. You move quietly toward another side of the room. A servant pours wine. Elsewhere in the palace, ale is far more common. Drink also follows hierarchy. Imported wine is expensive. Different qualities exist. Better varieties are associated with wealthier tables, while lower-ranking members of the household may receive other beverages according to allowance and custom. The pouring itself requires control. Spilling wine on a senior courtier is probably an efficient way to make a very memorable first impression. The servant does not spill. Experience wins again. Conversation begins to loosen. A gentleman comments on hunting. Another answers. Someone mentions a recent arrival from abroad. The tone appears social, but dining is also a useful environment for observation. Who speaks comfortably? Who is ignored? Who receives attention? Who laughs when the king laughs? Who suddenly finds a reason to become fascinated by his plate? Meals can reveal relationships in ways formal ceremonies cannot. This is particularly true at court, where ordinary behaviour is rarely entirely ordinary. A guest may be invited because of friendship, or diplomacy, or calculation, or because someone wants another person to notice the invitation. You look toward the higher end of the chamber. Status concentrates there. The best dishes tend to arrive first. Servants handle them carefully. Portions are distributed according to custom. There is a long-standing misconception that people in this era attack meat with bare hands in complete disorder. They certainly use fingers for some foods, but elite dining has rules. Hands are expected to be clean. Napkins matter. Knives are used. Behaviour can be judged. Courtesy manuals and household etiquette reveal a culture deeply concerned with controlled conduct at table. Do not reach greedily. Do not spit improperly. Do not wipe your nose on the tablecloth. The fact that such advice needs to be written tells you something rather charming about human consistency. You are suddenly grateful for several centuries of social embarrassment. A new dish arrives. It contains something sweet beside something savoury. You recognise dried fruit, perhaps raisins or prunes. The combination looks unusual through modern eyes, but elite Tudor cuisine regularly mixes sweetness, acidity, spice, and meat in ways that belong to a different culinary logic. Sugar is still expensive enough to signal status. It is becoming increasingly fashionable among wealthy Europeans, and because human beings are remarkably predictable. Once something is costly and prestigious, people immediately begin finding more ways to use it. Sweetened sauces, confections, preserves, decorative subtleties. Eventually, teeth will pay the bill. Poor dental health among wealthy early modern consumers is sometimes linked to increasing sugar consumption. Although diet is only one part of a complicated picture, you watch a gentleman bite into a sweetened preparation. He appears pleased. 5 centuries of dentistry quietly shudder. The meal continues. Servants remove dishes and replace them. Timing matters. Food cannot remain sitting too long. A delay in service affects temperature, appearance, and the entire rhythm of the table. You remember the kitchens. Every calm arrival here corresponds to frantic coordination elsewhere. Another servant enters carrying a covered dish. He walks steadily, not too fast, never too fast. Running would look chaotic. The great skill of palace service is urgency disguised as composure. You follow him with your eyes. When the cover is lifted, steam rises. Several diners lean slightly forward. Perhaps appetite is one of the few forces that briefly reduces political sophistication. Then conversation resumes. A man at the table mentions a recent gift. Another replies with a careful compliment. Gifts circulate constantly through court culture. Food itself may serve as a gift. Rare ingredients, venison, game, fish, wine, sweets, and preserved delicacies can reinforce relationships between households. One particularly curious custom is the presentation of elaborate sugar sculptures known as subtleties at high-status feasts. These edible constructions might take symbolic forms, sometimes carrying political or ceremonial meaning. Imagine receiving a message of royal authority in confectionery. Modern governments have clearly lost imagination. Whether such spectacular creations appear regularly in Henry's everyday private meals is another question. Surviving evidence strongly documents elaborate ceremonial dining, but reconstructing the exact frequency of exceptional dishes in ordinary palace routines remains difficult. The records tell you what was purchased. They do not always tell you what every diner thought about it. You look beyond the prestigious table. Elsewhere in Whitehall, meals are happening on very different terms. Servants may eat in groups according to department or rank. Some receive specified allowances. Others eat food connected to their service duties. Household regulations attempt to control entitlement because feeding hundreds of people invites waste, confusion, and creative interpretations of who deserves an extra portion. Food is valuable, so is access to it. A servant attached to a wealthy chamber may encounter better leftovers than someone working far from elite rooms. That difference creates another quiet hierarchy. The king may finish with a dish after only a small portion is taken. What remains does not automatically become rubbish. It can move downward. This practice of distributing leftovers, remnants, or uneaten portions is an important part of large household economies. Some food may pass to lower-ranking members, some may be reused, some may go to animals. What looks like waste from the high table can still carry considerable value elsewhere. You leave the chamber briefly and follow a servant carrying removed dishes. The transition is almost immediate. Behind the formal dining room, elegance begins to dissolve. Plates are scraped, containers are sorted, leftovers are separated, used linen is gathered. The smell becomes less refined. Sauce, fat, cold meat, wet cloth. You watch a boy collect pieces of bread. Nothing about his task appears prestigious, yet these remains matter. Bread can thicken another preparation. Bones can contribute to broth. Fat can be saved. Food that cannot be returned to an elite table may still be consumed elsewhere. The household extracts value from abundance. You return toward the dining chamber. The final part of the meal is approaching. Hands are cleaned. Drink continues. Conversation becomes easier. For some diners, this is when useful social contact begins. The formal requirement of eating has created an excuse to remain together. Someone might mention a petition. Someone might recommend a relative. Someone might quietly repair a disagreement. Dinner can become a political corridor with food on it. How much direct political negotiation actually takes place during particular royal meals is difficult to measure. Chroniclers record dramatic conversations more readily than ordinary ones, while household documents reveal logistics rather than every whispered exchange. Researchers, therefore, have to reconstruct the social importance of dining from fragments. The uncertainty feels natural here. Most influential moments do not announce themselves. A sentence passes, someone remembers it, someone acts 2 days later. History changes without knowing it has changed. The meal ends gradually, chairs shift, servants approach, important diners leave first. The chamber empties according to the same hierarchy that filled it. Within minutes, the room belongs to workers again. Cloths are removed, cups are counted, dishes disappear. Crumbs are gathered. A servant examines the floor with quiet resignation. The performance is over. The labour begins again. You remain for a moment beside the table. Only impressions remain. Warm wood, a few drops of spilled drink, the lingering scent of spice, and beyond the door. The people who made all of this possible are already returning to their own routines. They carried the food, they poured the wine, they scrubbed the pots, they removed the waste, they will wash the linen, they will prepare the rooms, they will rise again before many courtiers are awake. Whitehall's comfort rests on their exhaustion, so you leave the dining chamber and follow them. You leave the dining chamber behind and follow the people who remain after everyone important has gone. This is where Whitehall changes character again. The polished tablecloths disappear first, then the silver, then the conversation. What remains is work. A servant gathers used linen into his arms. Another carries cups toward a side room. 2 boys move a bench away from the wall, and somewhere farther along the passage, someone has already begun sweeping. The palace does not rest when a meal ends. It resets. You follow a young man carrying a stack of wooden trenchers. His steps are quick but careful. He knows the corridor well enough to turn corners without slowing. He passes a porter, ducks beneath a beam, avoids a bucket, and disappears through a doorway before you can decide whether he has done this route 50 times or 5,000. Probably closer to the second. Whitehall depends on repetition. The same floors are swept again. The same fires are fed again. The same beds are made again. The same clothes are brushed again. The same water is carried again. The grandest court in England is maintained through tasks so ordinary that most chroniclers barely mention them. You move toward a service stair. It is narrower than the routes used by high-ranking courtiers. The steps are worn in the middle. People have climbed here for years, carrying things heavier than dignity. A maid comes downward with a basket of linen balanced against her hip. You step aside. She does not thank you. She is tired. Fair enough. Laundry alone is a formidable operation. Shirts, sheets, napkins, towels, tablecloths, underlinen, and other washable textiles circulate constantly through a large household. Cleaning them requires water, fuel, soap or lye-based preparations, space for drying, and a considerable amount of physical effort. The water does not arrive through pipes at the turn of a tap. Someone carries it, then someone heats it. Then someone carries it again. You begin to suspect that much of pre-modern life can be summarized as carrying water towards something. A laundress works near a steaming tub. Her hands are red from heat and friction. Cloth is rubbed, beaten, rinsed, wrung, and checked. Stains are treated as practical enemies. White linen is especially demanding because its cleanliness is visible. Royal luxury creates enormous pressure for things to look effortless and fresh. Freshness, unfortunately, is extremely labor-intensive. You watch another woman lift a wet sheet. It hangs heavily between her hands. There is nothing delicate about this work. Nearby, a girl folds dry linen into careful rectangles. She moves slowly, perhaps conserving energy. Servants in the royal household do not all share the same status. Some are highly placed officers with wages, privileges, influence, and access. Others perform exhausting domestic labor with far less prestige. To call everyone here simply a servant hides an entire hierarchy. There are gentlemen, yeomen, grooms, pages, porters, scullions, laundry workers, stable hands, wardrobe staff, kitchen workers, chamber attendants, and dozens of other roles shaped by department and rank. Even service has rank within rank. You leave the laundry area and enter another passage. A groom is carrying bedding. The mattress itself is not moving, but blankets and covers are stacked almost to his chin. He can barely see. You move aside quickly. Being crushed beneath royal bedding would be historically memorable but personally disappointing. The groom passes safely. You follow. Beds are valuable objects. So are blankets. So are pillows. In a palace that moves with the king from residence to residence, bedding may need to be packed, transported, aired, repaired, and reassigned. Servants attached to chambers spend much of their time preparing spaces before their occupants arrive and restoring them after they leave. They build comfort in advance. A fire is laid before a nobleman feels cold. A bed is warmed before he becomes sleepy. Water is ready before he requests it. Clothing appears before he asks where it is. This is the ideal. Reality, naturally, contains mistakes. You hear a raised voice from one room. Someone has misplaced a pair of gloves. 3 servants are searching. One checks a chest. Another looks beneath folded clothing. A third insists that the gloves were delivered earlier. The missing objects are probably worth more than the combined annual patience of everyone in the room. Eventually, the gloves are discovered beneath another garment. Nobody celebrates. The servant responsible exhales quietly. Disaster has been downgraded to embarrassment. You continue toward the stable side of the palace. The smell reaches you first. Hay, leather, sweat, dung, horse. Royal life becomes instantly less perfumed. Stable workers move among animals with practiced confidence. A horse shifts in its stall. Another stamps a hoof. A groom runs his hand along a leg, checking for swelling or injury. These men are responsible for creatures worth significant sums of money. A fine horse represents transport, sport, status, and military potential. Keeping one healthy requires constant care, feeding, brushing, watering, cleaning stalls, checking hooves, maintaining tack, watching for illness, preparing animals before rides, cooling them afterward. Henry's court retains a strong equestrian culture even as his own mobility declines. Horses remain essential to royal movement and ceremony. You watch a groom curry a chestnut horse. Dust rises from the coat. The animal turns its head and gives him a look of profound suspicion. The groom ignores it. Some relationships require no diplomacy. An intriguing feature of court employment is that certain servants can become unusually trusted through long familiarity rather than formal political office. A groom who handles a favourite horse, a chamber attendant who knows a nobleman's habits, Or a porter who sees arrivals every day may possess practical knowledge no official document records. How much influence such people could exercise is difficult to calculate. Household records list positions and payments more readily than informal conversations. Personal closeness leaves fewer traces than official appointments. Still, no court functions only through paperwork. People remember who was kind, who was cruel, who paid promptly, who ignored them, who asked questions, who listened. You leave the stable and return indoors, at a doorway. A porter checks an arrival. Porters hold one of the palace's least glamorous forms of power. They decide who enters, or at least who proceeds without attracting further attention. A visitor gives his name. The porter listens. A second man checks with another officer. There is a brief delay. The visitor becomes visibly irritated. The porter remains unmoved. This is not his first impatient gentleman. Gatekeeping sounds metaphorical in your world. Here it has an actual gate. Porters are expected to manage traffic, monitor access, maintain order, and sometimes deal with people who believe their importance should cause doors to open automatically. You can imagine the patience required. You can also imagine the satisfaction of saying no. The visitor is eventually admitted. The porter barely reacts. Another person is already waiting. You move onward. A page passes carrying a message. He is young enough that his face still belongs more to adolescence than adulthood. Pages may come from respectable families and learn courtly behaviour through service. For some, this is training for a future among gentlemen. For others, it is simply work. The boy slows near a doorway, straightens his clothing, and enters. His posture changes immediately. This is another skill learned at Whitehall: how to become invisible while remaining useful, how to stand still, how to speak only when required, how to remember names, how to recognize badges, how to carry messages without reading them, how not to stare, how not to listen, and perhaps most importantly, how to listen while appearing not to. The palace educates through observation. You descend another staircase and reach a less comfortable room where several servants are eating quickly. Their meal bears little resemblance to the polished dining chamber you left earlier. Bread, ale, a simple dish, perhaps some leftover meat. Nobody complains. They are hungry enough for philosophy to wait. One man eats standing, another sits on a low bench. A third has already finished and is rubbing his hands together before returning to work. Rest arrives in fragments. The length of a servant's day depends heavily on role. Some duties begin before dawn, others continue late into the evening. Those attached closely to private chambers may follow the schedule of the person they serve. Kitchen workers rise early. Stable workers respond to animals. Porters keep watches. Fire and candle duties continue after dark. There is no universal moment when Whitehall clocks out. The household never truly stops. You notice a man asleep against the wall, not elegantly. His chin rests on his chest. A cup remains loosely in one hand. Nobody wakes him. Perhaps he has only a few minutes. Short periods of rest are likely common among workers whose schedules depend on unpredictable demands. Though reconstructing the exact rhythms of ordinary servant sleep is challenging. Surviving regulations tell you when duties should occur, but rules do not always reveal how exhausted people actually behaved. You let him sleep. A bell sounds from somewhere above. 3 people stand immediately. The sleeping man wakes without understanding where he is for half a second. Then training returns. He rises. Everyone moves. You follow the current of workers back toward the main corridors. A maid carries candles. A groom brings warmed water. A page runs with a message. A porter calls for someone near the entrance. A chamber servant disappears behind a door. A laundress passes with folded cloth. Their paths cross without ceremony. You realize that the palace you admired from the Thames exists because these people keep moving. Henry's jewels glitter because someone polishes them. His shirt is clean because someone scrubs it. His dinner is hot because someone stands beside fire for hours. His rooms are warm because someone carries fuel. His horses are ready because someone wakes earlier. His doors are guarded because someone remains standing while others sleep. Power is visible. Labour is not. That may be the oldest trick in palatial architecture. You walk slowly through the passage as evening approaches. The servants do not appear heroic. That is precisely why they matter. They are tired, efficient, distracted, hungry, skilled, occasionally irritated, completely human. Whitehall is not maintained by anonymous hands. It is maintained by people with sore feet, private jokes, ambitions, grudges, families, debts, and hopes that rarely survive in official records. And among those crowded lives are women whose positions inside the palace bring their own opportunities, dangers, friendships, duties, and constant scrutiny. You turn toward the chambers where their world becomes more visible. You turn into a quieter suite of rooms where the pace changes again. The servants still move quickly, but the atmosphere feels more contained. Voices are softer, doors remain watched. Fabrics hang more heavily across the walls, and the air carries a faint mixture of lavender, wax, wool, and smoke. This is the world of women attached to the royal household. Not one world. Of course, several. Noble women, ladies-in-waiting, maids, nurses, laundresses, seamstresses, female servants attached to chambers, women connected to noble families, women who arrive through marriage, patronage, kinship, or service. Their positions differ sharply, but they share one important reality. Life at court is intensely observed. You pass a doorway and see two women working beside a window. One is repairing embroidery. The other is reading a small book. Their clothing immediately marks them as respectable and well-placed. The room is comfortable enough. Though nowhere near the king's private chambers, cushions rest against a bench. A small fire burns. A chest stands beneath a wall hanging. One woman looks up as you pass, only briefly. Then she returns to her sewing. Needlework is not merely a decorative pastime among elite women. Embroidery can be a social skill, a devotional activity, a form of household production, and occasionally a means of displaying education and refinement. The work requires patience. You watch the needle pass through fabric. Tiny stitches build a pattern slowly. Court life often behaves the same way. A glance, a conversation, a favour, a shared meal, a recommendation. Small acts accumulate until they produce something larger. Women at Henry's court can influence those patterns, even when they hold no formal political office. Family networks matter enormously. A lady serving near the Queen or another royal woman can become a useful connection for relatives seeking favour. She may carry information, support a petition, introduce a name, or simply make sure someone is remembered. Influence does not always require standing in council. Sometimes it requires standing beside the right chair. You continue through the chamber. A maid brings fresh linen. Another arranges clothing on a chest. The women who serve in elite apartments perform practical work similar to that found throughout the palace. But here domestic service is mixed with ceremonial expectations. Dressing, hair, jewellery, laundry, messages, bedchamber preparation, needlework, attendance during meals, companionship, and perhaps the most demanding task of all, being available. A lady-in-waiting cannot simply vanish because she is tired. Her usefulness depends on presence. You notice one young woman suppressing a yawn. She succeeds. Barely. Court discipline begins with the face. In 1540, the Queen is Anne of Cleves. Her position is already becoming precarious. She arrived in England only months earlier and married Henry in January. The marriage was partly diplomatic. linking England with German Protestant interests through the Duchy of Cleves. Yet the relationship deteriorates rapidly. Henry complains that he is not attracted to her. By the summer, the marriage is being dismantled. None of this can remain purely private because a queen's marriage is also a political arrangement. You imagine the atmosphere in her household. Servants hear things, ladies notice changes, visits become shorter, conversations become more guarded. Someone receives an instruction that would have seemed unthinkable 6 months earlier. You do not need a formal announcement to know that something is wrong. Courts leak emotion before they leak documents. Anne herself has often been simplified in later storytelling. The familiar tale presents Henry as shocked by her appearance after being misled by Hans Holbein's portrait. The reality is less straightforward. Henry certainly expressed disappointment, but surviving evidence suggests that politics, personal incompatibility, sexual difficulties, and shifting alliances all played roles. Exactly how much weight should be placed on appearance remains disputed. The portrait may have been accurate by contemporary standards. Henry may simply have expected something different, or he may have found later reasons to justify a match he no longer wanted. History is inconveniently resistant to neat explanations. You pass another chamber where a group of women are speaking quietly. The conversation stops for a heartbeat when someone unfamiliar enters, then resumes. Gossip at court is not trivial. It is information. Who visits whom? Who looks unhappy? Who has received a gift? Who has been absent? Who has changed clothing? Who has been seen crying? Who spoke privately with the king? These details can become political because court life is built upon relationships. You realize how exhausting that must be. Modern gossip can disappear into a message thread. Tudor gossip follows you down the corridor in person. There is no mute button. Reputation is especially fragile for women. Expectations surrounding chastity, obedience, modest behavior, family honor, and marital loyalty are intense. Men can also suffer from scandal, but the consequences for women may be particularly severe because female sexual reputation is closely tied to family standing and legitimacy. The recent memory of Anne Boleyn still hangs over the court. Only 4 years have passed since her execution. Jane Seymour followed her and died after childbirth in 1537. Anne of Cleves now occupies the uncertain position of Henry's 4th wife. Women serving near the Queen cannot forget how rapidly royal favour can transform. You pass a young attendant carrying pins and ribbons. She moves carefully. Clothing preparation involves endless small objects. Pins are particularly important because many garments depend on tying. Pinning, lacing, hooks, and layered construction rather than the modern systems you take for granted. Losing one pin does not matter much. Losing 20 around a bedchamber probably becomes educational. A surprisingly ordinary item like a pin can become a meaningful household expense when consumed in large quantities. Court accounts sometimes reveal purchases of pins by the thousands. It is one of those details that punctures the grandeur beautifully. Henry VIII may command kingdoms. Somewhere, someone is still ordering more pins. You move farther into the female household. A woman holds a small container of scented water. Another brushes hair. Personal grooming is intimate work. Hair must be arranged beneath caps, hoods, veils, or other headwear according to fashion and status. Elite women may use combs, pins, ribbons, scented preparations, and decorative pieces. Hairlines can even be shaped deliberately to suit fashionable ideals. The effect appears effortless when finished. It is not. Nothing at Whitehall is effortless. You remember the king's dressing ritual. Here too. Public appearance is built in private. A woman stands while another fastens part of her gown. The fabric is heavy. Sleeves are adjusted separately. A necklace is positioned. The final effect conveys rank before she ever speaks. Dress laws affect women as well as men, regulating access to costly materials and styles. Yet fashion always finds ways to negotiate rules. People copy upward, they imitate details, they stretch definitions. Human beings apparently invented aspirational dressing long before department stores. The woman turns slightly toward a polished, reflective surface. Satisfied, she leaves. The maid behind her immediately begins putting objects away. The invisible half of elegance begins again. You follow another corridor toward rooms associated with rest and personal care. Here, the subject becomes more delicate. Childbirth is one of the central realities shaping women's lives in the Tudor court. For queens, it becomes a matter of dynasty. Producing heirs is treated as a political duty. Pregnancy brings celebration, surveillance, fear, and elaborate preparation. When a royal woman approaches childbirth, female attendants become especially important. Certain spaces can be restricted largely to women, creating one of the rare court environments where female expertise temporarily dominates. Midwives possess practical knowledge built from experience. Female relatives and attendants may remain nearby. Rooms may be darkened and warmed according to contemporary beliefs about proper confinement. The process is dangerous. Everyone knows it. Jane Seymour's death following the birth of Edward VI remains recent memory. You sense how that loss must still affect palace women, not abstractly, personally. They witnessed rooms being prepared, they saw physicians arrive, they heard updates. Some may have served Jane directly. Court history is often described through succession, but the women living inside these chambers experience it as absence. A familiar voice disappears, a room is reassigned, clothing is packed. Another woman takes the title. A lady sitting near the window lowers her sewing for a moment. She stares into the courtyard. You wonder what she is thinking. The archives cannot tell you. This is one of the most frustrating silences in social history. Household accounts may preserve her wages. A list may preserve her name. A letter may mention her marriage. But the private thoughts of ordinary attendants rarely survive. Researchers can reconstruct structures of service and kinship far more easily than emotion, yet emotion must have filled these rooms. Jealousy, loyalty, fear, friendship, boredom, grief, ambition, relief. You cannot see them on account books, but you can almost feel them here. Two women laugh softly at something near the doorway. The sound lasts only a moment. It changes the room completely. Court women are not permanently trapped in solemn political tension. They joke, play music, read, sew, exchange gifts, discuss clothes, complain about other people, form friendships, perhaps dislike one another magnificently. Daily life continues even when dynastic history hangs overhead. You move toward a table where several small devotional objects rest. Religion remains deeply woven into women's routines, just as it does throughout the household. Books of prayer, rosaries in some contexts, religious images, charitable giving, and attendance at worship can structure daily time and personal identity. Yet even private devotion is becoming politically complicated. England's religious settlement remains unsettled. Some women retain strong attachment to traditional Catholic practices. Others become interested in reformist ideas. Many probably occupy less tidy positions than later labels suggest. Belief does not always divide neatly, nor does friendship. Two women may disagree profoundly about doctrine while still sharing a chamber. That tension will become increasingly important in the years ahead. For now, you hear only footsteps and soft conversation. A servant closes a chest. Another carries away folded linen. A noble woman enters with two attendants behind her. Everyone adjusts almost imperceptibly. Rank has arrived. The room rearranges itself without anyone giving an order. You've seen this before. Whitehall trains bodies to recognize hierarchy instantly, but among the women of the palace, another system operates beneath the official one. Kinship, marriage, friendship, shared secrets, old loyalties, private resentments, who helped whom, who witnessed what, who can be trusted. These connections rarely appear on architectural plans, yet they run through the palace more effectively than corridors, and corridors have ears. As you leave the women's apartments, you begin to hear voices from beyond a half-open door. Someone mentions a name quietly. Another person answers. Then the conversation stops, not because nothing happened, because you walked past, you keep moving, behind you. The voices begin again, and suddenly Whitehall feels less like a palace of rooms than a palace of information. Every doorway hides a conversation, every servant may have heard something, every visitor may carry a rumour beyond the walls, and before long you will discover how dangerous a whisper can become when it travels through a court already crowded with fear, ambition, and uncertainty. The voices behind the door fade as you move farther along the corridor, but the idea of them stays with you. Someone has said something, someone else has heard it, and somewhere inside Whitehall that small exchange may already be travelling. Rumour moves differently from official news. Official news carries seals, signatures, messengers, and instructions. Rumour needs almost nothing. A servant sees a nobleman enter the wrong chamber. A lady notices that the queen has not been summoned. A groom hears that a horse has been prepared unusually early. A clerk receives a document marked for urgent delivery. A porter recognizes a visitor who is not expected. By supper, 5 people know. By evening, 20 people know something slightly different. You turn through another passage. 2 gentlemen are speaking beside a window. Their voices stop as you approach. One gives you a polite nod. The other looks outside with sudden fascination, as though the Thames has just revealed the secret of existence. You pass. Their conversation resumes behind you. Whitehall does not need literal listening walls. It has something better. People. Hundreds of them. They clean rooms, carry food, open doors, hold horses, fetch clothes, deliver letters, tend fires, and stand quietly enough that important people sometimes forget they are there. Servants often hear without being invited to hear. That makes them dangerous repositories of information, not necessarily because they intend to betray anyone, simply because knowledge travels socially. A maid tells another maid, a groom mentions something to a brother, a cook repeats a story while working, a messenger adds one detail, a courtier removes another. Soon the rumour bears only a family resemblance to whatever actually happened. You enter a waiting chamber. Several men stand near the walls. One is holding a folded petition. He has probably been waiting a long time. You recognise the particular stiffness of someone trying not to look frustrated. Petitions are everywhere in Tudor court life. People seek offices, land, money, licenses, relief from legal problems, royal favour, appointments, pardons, and intervention in disputes. The king cannot personally hear every request, so petitioners look for routes inward. A cousin who knows a gentleman of the Privy Chamber, a former employer who serves an officer, a noble patron, a secretary, a lady with access to the Queen. Influence becomes a chain of human connections. The petitioner finally approaches a gentleman entering the chamber. There is a quiet exchange. The folded paper changes hands. No trumpet sounds. No clerk announces that patronage has occurred. Yet something important may just have happened. Access is political currency. You think back to the private apartments. The man who can speak casually to Henry while helping him dress may possess more practical influence at a particular moment than someone with a grander title standing 3 rooms away. That creates competition, and competition creates observation. Who has been admitted? Who has been refused? Who receives a smile? Who leaves looking worried? A courtier can spend half the day pretending not to monitor such things. You continue. The year 1540 gives every whisper additional weight. Thomas Cromwell, one of the most powerful figures of Henry's government, is approaching disaster. Only a few months earlier, he stood at the centre of royal administration and helped arrange Henry's marriage to Anne of Cleves. Now opposition is hardening around him. His enemies include powerful conservative nobles who dislike both his religious policies and his extraordinary rise from comparatively modest origins. The atmosphere becomes increasingly dangerous. You imagine what that looks like before anyone knows the outcome. A greeting becomes shorter. An invitation fails to arrive. Someone once friendly becomes busy. A familiar ally avoids being seen in conversation with you. Political collapse rarely begins with a scaffold. It begins with distance. You walk past a chamber where several clerks work beneath weak daylight. One man sands a newly written page to help dry the ink. Another folds a document. A seal is prepared. These pieces of paper carry authority in a form rumour cannot, but even documents generate whispers. Who drafted the order? Why today? Why was that messenger sent? Why has that officer been summoned? Administrative behaviour becomes evidence to anyone who watches closely enough. Whitehall is full of people who watch closely. You hear footsteps approaching rapidly. A messenger passes with a sealed packet. He does not stop. 3 people notice him. One asks quietly where he is going. Nobody answers. That silence is almost guaranteed to create a theory. Modern scholars continue to examine how far political factions at Henry's court functioned as organised groups rather than looser networks that formed around particular issues, families, religious sympathies, and moments of crisis. The distinction matters. Later accounts often make Tudor politics look like 2 permanent teams facing each other across the palace. Daily reality was probably much messier. Alliances shift. Personal relationships overlap. A man can support another on one issue and oppose him on the next. Religious preference does not always predict political behaviour. Family loyalty can compete with ambition. Ambition can compete with survival. You stop beside a recessed window. Below, servants cross a courtyard. One carries firewood, another carries a basket. Nothing about the scene appears political. Then a finely dressed gentleman crosses in the opposite direction. Both servants immediately step aside. Politics is built into movement itself. You notice a small cluster of men under a covered passage. They are not supposed to look interested in anyone passing. They look extremely interested. Court rumour has its own economy. Useful information can make a person valuable. If you know which appointment is coming open, you can position a relative. If you hear that a minister has lost favour, you can withdraw before his fall damages you. If you learn which policy Henry currently supports, you can adjust your language accordingly. Information becomes self-protection. It can also become a weapon. A carefully placed accusation may damage a rival. A repeated suspicion can harden into apparent fact. A private joke can become evidence of disloyalty if carried to the wrong listener. You would probably like to believe that everyone checks sources before repeating serious claims. Whitehall offers a less optimistic model. One curious feature of Tudor political culture is the importance attached to seemingly minor words and gestures. A phrase spoken at dinner, an insulting rhyme, a prediction about the king, or even an imprudent comment about royal marriage can become dangerous if interpreted as disloyal. Speech is not protected in the way you might expect. Words can carry legal consequences. That makes casual conversation surprisingly high risk. You pass two servants whispering near a staircase. One notices you and immediately changes the subject. Now they are discussing candles. Apparently with enormous urgency, you continue without reacting. The silence behind you lasts several seconds. Then the whispering returns. Perhaps it truly was about candles. This is how Whitehall changes your mind. After enough time here, even Wick management starts to look conspiratorial. A door opens ahead. A gentleman emerges looking pale. Several people glance toward him. He speaks to no one. He walks quickly away. Immediately, the chamber around you becomes tense. Nobody asks what happened. Not publicly. But you can almost feel questions multiplying. Was the king angry? Was a request denied? Has someone been accused? Is an office changing hands? The gentleman disappears. A servant enters the room he left. Normal movement resumes. Yet the moment remains. By tonight, someone will claim to know exactly what happened. They probably will not. You move toward another corridor where household officers gather around a table. Names are being discussed. You cannot hear enough to understand why. The men speak carefully. A senior figure points to a written list. Another shakes his head. The conversation seems administrative. That does not make it harmless. Appointments to household positions matter because offices provide income, status, contacts, and proximity. Patronage binds people together. A successful courtier is expected to help followers and relatives if he cannot. Loyalty may weaken. Power must circulate. It cannot merely be possessed. You think again of Cromwell. His strength has depended partly on his ability to secure offices, advance clients, manage royal business, and connect himself to networks across the kingdom. If royal confidence disappears, much of that structure becomes vulnerable. People who once depended on him must decide how quickly to distance themselves. The moral calculation is unpleasant. The practical calculation is obvious. Do you remain loyal to a falling patron, or do you survive history records both choices? You cross into a gallery where daylight runs along the windows. The space feels calmer. A few courtiers walk slowly, speaking in pairs. Galleries provide useful places for conversation because movement itself offers an excuse for privacy. Two people can walk together without formally announcing a meeting. Of course, everyone can still see them walking together. Privacy at Whitehall is often more theatrical than real. A gentleman passes carrying a small notebook. Another has letters tucked inside his clothing. Written correspondence is essential to court networks. Letters carry favours, warnings, recommendations, family news, instructions, and gossip beyond Whitehall. People outside London depend on contacts at court to explain what is happening. Those explanations may be accurate, or optimistic, or deliberately misleading. A single letter can shape how a distant noble understands royal policy, and because letters can be intercepted, copied, lost, or shown to others, careful writers learn how to say things indirectly. You reach the end of the gallery. Below, the Thames continues flowing past the palace. Boats move in both directions. News leaves Whitehall by water just as efficiently as food arrives. A messenger can carry a rumour into London within minutes. From there it moves into taverns, merchant houses, noble households, foreign embassies, and eventually across England or Europe. The palace is not sealed. It leaks information constantly. Foreign ambassadors are particularly interested in those leaks. Diplomats cultivate contacts, question informants, observe ceremonies, interpret facial expressions, and report court developments back to their governments. Their surviving dispatches provide some of the richest descriptions of Henry's court. They also require caution. Ambassadors have their own biases, incomplete information, and political agendas. A dramatic report is not automatically a perfect report. The truth may sit somewhere between what the ambassador heard and what the king intended anyone to know. That uncertainty is part of what makes Whitehall so fascinating. You never possess the whole story, neither did they. A courtier standing in this gallery knows only his section of the palace, a servant knows another, a queen knows another, a minister knows another. Henry himself receives filtered information from people who want particular outcomes. Power does not eliminate uncertainty, it concentrates it. A bell sounds, the gallery begins to empty. You follow the movement back toward the central rooms. Someone passes you and whispers a name to another man. Cromwell. The answer is too quiet to catch. For a moment, you want to stop. You want to know. But that is exactly how Whitehall works. It makes you curious. Then it makes curiosity dangerous. So you keep walking. Beyond these corridors, another kind of tension is gathering, one that cannot be reduced to patronage or rumour. It reaches deeper into prayer, ritual, conscience, and identity. England has broken with Rome. Monasteries have fallen. Traditional practices are being questioned. And yet Henry's kingdom is far from simply Protestant. Tomorrow morning, bells will still call people to worship, candles will still burn, prayers will still be spoken. And inside Whitehall's chapel, the religious uncertainty of an entire kingdom will gather beneath one roof. Morning reaches Whitehall softly. The palace is awake before the sun has properly settled across the river. And the first signs of activity are not political. They are devotional. A bell sounds. Footsteps turn toward the chapel. You follow them. The route is calmer than the corridors you crossed yesterday. Servants still carry objects. Gentlemen still exchange quiet remarks. A page hurries past with something folded beneath one arm. Yet the movement gradually gathers in one direction, as though the palace itself has developed a current. Prayer is part of the daily structure here. That remains true even in a kingdom that has spent the last decade tearing apart some of its oldest religious arrangements. You enter the chapel space. The air feels cooler. Wax and incense linger faintly. Light falls across wood, cloth, metal, and stone. People take their places according to rank. Nothing at Whitehall escapes hierarchy, not even devotion. Those closest to the royal household occupy privileged positions. Others remain farther back. Servants stand where they are expected. Everyone seems to know when to kneel, when to rise, when to respond, and when silence is required. You imitate them carefully. This is not the ideal location to invent your own liturgy. The service begins, to modern ears. The religious world of Henry VIII in 1540 can seem confusing. England has rejected papal authority. The king has declared himself supreme head of the Church of England. Monasteries have been dissolved. Church wealth has been seized on a vast scale. And yet much of worship still looks recognisably traditional. Priests remain, mass remains, vestments remain, candles remain. Traditional doctrines remain important to Henry. The break with Rome has not instantly produced the later Protestant church many people imagine when they hear the phrase English Reformation. In fact, Henry himself resists several more radical reforms. That tension surrounds you now. The chapel looks familiar to anyone accustomed to late medieval worship, but the political meaning behind it has changed dramatically. The Pope no longer stands at the top of the English ecclesiastical hierarchy. The king does. That is not a minor administrative adjustment. It changes the relationship between church, crown, law, property, and obedience. You listen as prayers continue. For many people in the room, belief is probably not experienced as a neat ideological label. They do not wake each morning thinking, "Today, I shall behave as a perfect representative of a later historical category. Religion is woven into habit, into calendars, into family memory, into food, marriage, burial, charity, fear, hope, illness, childbirth, death. You remember the kitchens and their fish days. Religious practice reaches all the way into what appears on the table. Now you see the other side of it. The chapel gives time a rhythm. Days are marked by services. Feasts and fasts shape the year. Holy days structure work. Prayers accompany danger. Oaths invoke God. Even political language assumes a religious universe. To challenge the structure of belief is therefore to disturb everyday life. You glance toward Henry. His religious journey is full of contradictions. As a younger king, he famously defended traditional Catholic teaching against Martin Luther and received the title Defender of the Faith from Pope Leo VI. Later, the same king rejected papal authority when Rome would not grant the annulment he sought from Catherine of Aragon. Yet Henry did not become a straightforward Lutheran or evangelical reformer. He remained attached to many traditional doctrines and practices. By 1539, the Act of 6 Articles had reaffirmed positions such as transubstantiation and clerical celibacy, punishing those who openly rejected them. So here you stand in a country that has broken from Rome without breaking cleanly from Catholic theology. The religious map is being redrawn while people are still living on it. A priest continues the service. You notice an older gentleman bow his head deeply. Nearby, a younger courtier watches with the same seriousness. Can you tell what either man privately believes? No, that is one of the central difficulties of this period. Public conformity is visible, private conviction is not. Some people sincerely support royal supremacy, some resent it, some accept certain reforms but dislike others, some remain deeply attached to older forms of devotion. Some are attracted to evangelical ideas circulating from the continent. Many probably move uneasily among these positions depending on education, family, location, and circumstance. Later generations often describe the Reformation as though everyone immediately chooses a side. Inside Whitehall, it feels more like standing on a floor that keeps shifting while pretending you're perfectly balanced. The service proceeds. A richly bound devotional book passes briefly through the hands of an attendant. Books matter increasingly in this religious world. Printed texts allow ideas to circulate with a speed unimaginable a century earlier. English translations of scripture become particularly significant. In 1539, the Great Bible was authorized for use in churches. That means ordinary worshippers can encounter an official English Bible in parish settings. Although literacy varies widely and public reading remains crucial, the arrival of scripture in English changes the atmosphere of religious authority. People who can read may encounter biblical passages directly. People who cannot read can still hear them. Questions follow, interpretations follow, arguments follow. Printing does not create religious disagreement, but it gives disagreement excellent transportation. You imagine a book moving from hand to hand, a marginal note, a passage remembered, a phrase repeated at supper. Whitehall's rumour networks suddenly seem almost mild. Ideas can travel farther than gossip. One small oddity of the age is that owning religious texts can become both fashionable and dangerous depending on the book, the language, and the moment. A volume that demonstrates piety in one context might raise suspicion in another. A reader must sometimes know not only what is written, but whether the authorities currently approve of reading it. Your bedside reading has probably involved less legal calculation. The service ends gradually, people rise, conversation returns in low tones, the chapel empties according to rank. You follow several gentlemen into an adjoining passage. A discussion begins almost immediately. Not theology exactly, more like cautious commentary on a sermon. One man praises a particular phrase. Another agrees without adding much. A third says nothing. You notice the silence. At Whitehall, silence can be a form of intelligence. Religious opinions now carry political consequences. An openly radical reformer may attract suspicion. A defender of papal authority may be treated as disloyal to the crown. A careless theological statement can become evidence. This creates an atmosphere where belief and survival sometimes negotiate with one another. You pass a chamber where a cleric is speaking with an official. Documents lie on the table. Church administration increasingly passes through royal structures. Bishops, commissioners, secretaries, and legal officers all participate in enforcing religious change. The dissolution of the monasteries has transformed the physical and economic landscape of England. Monastic houses have been closed. Their lands and goods have passed into royal hands, then often onward through sale, grant, or redistribution. Some buildings are dismantled, others become private residences. Former monastic property feeds a new network of landholding. The consequences extend far beyond theology. Local charity changes, employment changes, land ownership changes, education changes, hospitality changes. Communities lose institutions that may have stood for centuries. At court, this upheaval can appear as documents and property. In the countryside, it may feel like an empty gatehouse. Not everyone responds in the same way. Resistance has already erupted. The Pilgrimage of Grace in 1536 brought large numbers of rebels together in northern England, protesting religious and political changes. Among other grievances, the uprising was suppressed. Its memory remains powerful. The Crown has learned that religious policy can produce dangerous political reaction. People have learned the same lesson from the opposite direction. You move toward another room where religious images still remain visible. That detail matters. Later Protestant iconoclasm may make you expect bare walls immediately. But 1540 is not yet that world. Visual religion has not simply vanished. Traditional imagery, sacred objects, ceremonial practice, and older habits continue in many places even as criticism grows around them. The pace of change is uneven. One parish embraces reform quickly. Another clings to older customs. A court preacher may sound bold. A village priest may sound cautious. A noble household may support translation and reform while retaining familiar devotional objects. Trying to force all of England into one religious mood would be misleading. Even specialists disagree about how deeply official changes had transformed popular belief by this point. Parish records reveal compliance, resistance, and adaptation, but they cannot perfectly expose private faith. What people did publicly is easier to trace than what they believed at night when no official was listening. You think of the women you saw yesterday beside their devotional objects. Their prayers may be traditional, reformist, mixed, private, perhaps even uncertain to themselves. Faith does not always arrive as certainty. Sometimes it arrives as a routine, sometimes fear, sometimes comfort, sometimes habit repeated because your parents repeated it. You turn back toward the central corridors. The palace has resumed its ordinary noise. A servant carries candles, a messenger passes. Someone complains about a delayed delivery. A gentleman asks where an officer has gone. Religious upheaval does not stop domestic life. That may be the strangest thing. While monasteries close and doctrines shift, someone still has to wash shirts. While bishops debate authority, someone still feeds the horses. While sermons condemn error, someone still checks whether the king's room is warm enough. History often feels dramatic afterward because we collect the changes into a single story. Living through it feels fragmented. A prayer in the morning, a rumour at noon, a new law announced next month, an old custom quietly abandoned next year. You barely notice the moment when one world becomes another, and inside Whitehall. The king at the centre of these religious transformations is also a man whose body is becoming harder to manage. His leg troubles worsen. His weight increases. Physicians attend him more frequently. Medicines, poultices, diets, examinations, and household remedies begin to matter more. The next hidden chamber is not political or devotional. It smells of herbs, wax, and uncertainty. And there, the question is no longer how to save the kingdom's soul, it is how to keep the king comfortable inside his own body. The scent changes before you see the room. Herbs, warm wax, dried roots, vinegar, something bitter steeping in liquid, something sweeter attempting, with limited success, to disguise it. You follow the smell toward a quieter part of the palace where attendants move with a different kind of care. This is not the controlled elegance of the royal wardrobe or the rapid heat of the kitchens. This is the world of health, and in 1540 health is part observation, part inherited medical theory, part practical experience, part household knowledge, and part hope. A physician stands beside a table. Small containers rest near his hand. One holds a powder. Another contains a dark liquid. A folded cloth lies beside a shallow dish. Nothing looks especially dramatic. That is almost reassuring. Henry's medical care is not one continuous scene of desperate crisis. Much of it consists of routine attention to discomfort. Digestion, sleep, wounds, appetite, swelling, and the other complaints that become increasingly important as his body changes. You hear footsteps. Henry enters with assistants nearby. Again, no one makes that assistance look obvious. The king's mobility has become more limited, particularly because of his long-standing leg problems. One serious jousting accident in 1536 is often treated as a turning point. Henry was thrown from his horse and injured badly enough to alarm the court. Stories later grew around the event, sometimes claiming that it transformed his personality almost overnight. The evidence is less tidy. His health certainly deteriorated during these years, but connecting every later decision directly to one accident risks turning a complicated man into a medical footnote. You watch him settle into a chair. His expression tightens briefly. Pain is visible, then controlled. The physician approaches. Royal doctors work under unusual pressure. A mistake involving an ordinary patient is unfortunate. A mistake involving the king can become a matter of state. You would imagine this encourages careful confidence, not too much confidence, and definitely no nervous shrugging. The physician asks questions. Henry answers. The exchange sounds almost ordinary. Sleep, appetite, pain, movement, the condition of his leg, in a world without modern imaging, laboratory tests, antibiotics, or reliable anesthesia. Diagnosis depends heavily on observation, pulse, urine, complexion, temperature as perceived by touch, pain described by the patient, visible swelling, changes in appetite and mood. Medical theory still rests strongly on the ancient framework of the four humours: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Health is thought to depend upon their proper balance. Diet, environment, age, season, emotion, and bodily constitution can all influence that balance. To you, this framework sounds obsolete. To the physician, it is a coherent medical system supported by centuries of learning. That distinction matters. People in the past are not pretending to understand medicine. They're working with the best intellectual tools available to them. A servant brings a glass vessel. You immediately know what is coming. Urine examination. Uroscopy is a familiar diagnostic practice in medieval and early modern medicine. Physicians may inspect colour, clarity, sediment, and other qualities in an attempt to understand internal conditions. The vessel itself, often shaped to allow examination, becomes so associated with physicians that it appears in medical imagery as a professional symbol. You watch the doctor hold it toward the light. This is probably the least majestic object you have seen connected to monarchy, and perhaps the most democratic. Kings, apparently, also produce diagnostic samples. The physician studies it seriously. You try not to. A discussion follows. Diet may be adjusted. Food is considered medicinal as well as nourishing. Certain foods are classified according to qualities such as hot, cold, moist, or dry. A person's constitution and illness might call for foods thought to restore balance. The royal kitchen therefore serves medicine as well as appetite. A physician can recommend changes, though whether Henry always enjoys following them is another question entirely. You remember the elaborate dishes. Good luck telling that kitchen to become moderate. Another practitioner arrives carrying a small box. Apothecaries occupy an important place between medicine and craft. They prepare and supply compounds made from herbs, minerals, resins, spices, oils, syrups, and other substances. Some remedies are mild, some are ineffective, some are useful in ways their users cannot fully explain. Others would make a modern toxicologist extremely interested. The box opens. Dried plant material lies inside. Herbal medicine has accumulated practical knowledge over generations. Preparations using mint, sage, rosemary, lavender, fennel, chamomile, and many other plants may be used for digestion, sleep, pain, scent, or general comfort. Not every remedy is foolish. Not every remedy is safe. Pre-modern medicine lives in that uncomfortable middle ground. The physician gestures toward Henry's leg. The king's chronic wound has attracted enormous later speculation. Descriptions suggest recurring ulceration and difficulty with healing. Some writers have proposed circulatory disease. Others have suggested infection, diabetes, obesity-related complications, or damage from earlier injuries. No retrospective diagnosis can be fully secure. The surviving evidence was never gathered for modern clinical analysis. What does seem clear is that the condition causes repeated pain and affects mobility. You see the practical consequences here. A wound must be inspected, dressings changed, swelling monitored, pain managed. The room becomes briefly more private. You remain at the edge. A servant prepares clean cloth. Another warms water. The king's clothing is adjusted enough to permit examination. A physician leans closer. No one speaks unnecessarily. The mood is not theatrical. It is tired. Perhaps that is what chronic illness looks like in any century. Not one great emergency. Repetition. Again, and again, and again. You think of the servants from earlier. Someone must wash these dressings. Someone must dispose of stained cloth. Someone must prepare fresh material. Someone must clean the room afterward. Royal illness generates another hidden chain of labour. A salve is prepared. Ingredients may include oils, fats, waxes, herbs, resins, or other substances depending on purpose. The mixture is applied carefully. You cannot know whether it helps. Perhaps it soothes the skin. Perhaps it protects the wound. Perhaps it does almost nothing. Relief can still matter even when cure is impossible. A servant closes the container. Henry shifts in the chair. The doctor speaks quietly. You notice that medicine here includes diplomacy. A physician must advise the king without insulting him. Imagine telling Henry VIII that he should eat less, exercise differently, rest more, or avoid an activity he enjoys. You may prefer treating the fever. At least fever does not hold grudges. One of the more revealing details from Tudor medical culture is the widespread use of personalized remedies. Wealthy people may commission medicines designed specifically for their bodies, symptoms, and constitutions. Henry himself is known to have taken an active interest in remedies. Recipes associated with the royal household include preparations for ulcers, plasters, ointments, and other complaints. The idea of the king experimenting with medicine feels unexpected, yet Renaissance rulers are often intellectually curious across subjects that modern life would divide into separate professions: theology, astronomy, music, architecture, medicine. A monarch can take an interest in all of them without needing a degree. Whether you would like to be treated by that monarch is a separate question. The examination finishes. Henry's clothing is arranged again. The transformation happens in reverse. The patient becomes the king. He asks a question. The physician answers carefully. You cannot hear enough to know whether the response is welcome. Henry nods. For now, the consultation is over, but you remain in the medical spaces a little longer. A nearby room contains shelves of containers. Some are ceramic, others glass. Labels identify contents. Dried herbs hang from hooks. A mortar rests on a work surface. The place looks halfway between a pharmacy and a kitchen run by someone with extremely specific opinions about leaves. A worker grinds material with a pestle. The rhythm is slow. Scrape, turn, press, scrape again. Powders must be measured. Liquids strained. Ingredients combined. Syrups boiled. Ointments mixed. Medicine takes labour before it reaches the patient. You pick up the scent of rosewater. Pleasant. Nearby. Something sulphurous ruins the moment. Not every treatment is meant to smell reassuring. Personal hygiene also overlaps with medicine. Tudor people do wash. Despite the persistent myth that everyone spends the century proudly avoiding water, they wash hands and faces. Bathing practices vary. Linen is changed. Combs are used. Teeth may be cleaned with cloths, powders, or tooth preparations. People are very aware of unpleasant odours. What they lack are modern plumbing systems and germ theory, not noses. You pass a basin with water prepared for washing. Cleanliness is understood differently from your own standards, but it is not absent. Air itself is thought capable of affecting health. Bad smells can be associated with dangerous corruption. Rooms may be aired, sweet herbs burned, perfumes used, vinegar employed. This concern becomes especially intense during outbreaks of plague or other disease. Whitehall's population makes illness a constant worry. Hundreds of people live, work, eat, and sleep close together. Visitors arrive from London, messengers travel between regions. Servants move among crowded spaces. Disease has excellent opportunities when epidemics threaten. The royal household can move away. Henry's mobility between residences is not only recreational. Avoiding disease forms part of royal risk management. The Crown may issue orders restricting access from infected places. People suspected of exposure can be kept away. None of this is based on microorganisms, yet experience has taught people that proximity matters. They may explain contagion differently, but they recognize patterns. A servant enters carrying a note concerning someone ill elsewhere in the household. The physician reads it. He asks several questions immediately. Another small network activates. Who has been near the sick person? Which chamber? How long? What symptoms? The palace is not merely protecting one patient. It is protecting continuity. If the king becomes seriously ill, government slows, diplomacy trembles, succession becomes urgent, rumour explodes. Royal health is national information. That is why medical details are guarded so carefully. Foreign ambassadors are eager for clues. A limp can become a diplomatic report. A missed appearance can generate speculation. An unusually long period in private chambers can make Europe curious. You think back to the listening walls. Here is another source of rumour. A physician leaving the king's room. a medicine carried inward, a cancelled ride, an uneaten meal. People construct conclusions from fragments. You turn toward the corridor. Henry has already moved on. The medical staff remain behind. Cloths are gathered, containers are cleaned, the mortar continues grinding for the king. Treatment is one episode in the day. For these people, it is their entire profession. As you leave, the palace sounds lighter ahead. Music drifts faintly from another room, a string instrument. Laughter. The shift feels almost indecently quick. Pain in one chamber, entertainment in the next. But that is Whitehall. Nothing happens in isolation, and as evening approaches, the court begins seeking distraction from business, illness, religion, and rumour. Cards appear, dice roll, musicians tune their instruments, dogs settle near warm fires, and for a few hours, even a dangerous court can pretend that amusement is simply amusement. Music reaches you before the room itself. At first, it is only a faint pattern beneath the ordinary sounds of Whitehall, a plucked string, a brief run of notes. Then another instrument answers. As you follow the sound, the palace gradually loosens its grip on the seriousness of the day. The corridors are still guarded, rank still matters, servants still move with purpose. But the atmosphere is changing. Business is giving way to amusement. You enter a chamber where several musicians are preparing. One adjusts the strings of a lute, another checks the tuning of a viol, a third waits with a recorder resting lightly in his hands. The room is warm, and the firelight catches polished wood, metal fittings, and embroidered clothing. Henry VIII has a genuine interest in music. He plays instruments, employs musicians, supports court performance, and is associated with a substantial body of compositions, though attributing every surviving piece linked to him is not always straightforward. Music is not merely background decoration here, it is part of elite education, ceremony, sociability, and royal identity. A gentleman near the fire begins speaking to one of the players. They exchange a few words about the next piece. The musician nods. Moments later, the room quiets. The lute begins. The sound is softer than recorded music would suggest. There is no amplification, no speaker filling the room. You have to listen. That changes the mood. Conversation lowers naturally because otherwise the music disappears beneath it. The melody moves gently through the chamber. For several minutes, Whitehall feels almost peaceful. Then someone near the back coughs loudly. History remains human. You notice Henry among the listeners. His physical limitations may increasingly restrict the athletic amusements he once enjoyed. But entertainment remains important to court life. Earlier in his reign, Henry was celebrated for jousting, hunting, wrestling, dancing, archery, and elaborate displays of physical skill. By 1540, some of those activities are more difficult. The court adapts. Music, games, conversation, performance, and spectacle become even more useful because they allow amusement without requiring the king to spend several hours demonstrating that he can outrun everyone. The song ends. People murmur, approval. Another begins. This one is livelier. A few listeners exchange smiles. You see fingers tapping lightly against a chair. Court music can include devotional works, dances, songs, instrumental pieces, and compositions imported from or influenced by continental styles. Musicians come from different regions. Foreign performers can enjoy prestigious positions. The Tudor court is far more internationally connected than the image of an isolated English palace suggests. Italian, French, Flemish, German, Spanish, English. Ideas and styles move with diplomats, merchants, craftsmen, artists, and performers. Entertainment is one of the easiest places to hear that movement. You leave the musicians temporarily and follow laughter into another chamber. Cards are spread across a table. Coins sit nearby. Several gentlemen lean forward with intense concentration. The mood is relaxed only by Whitehall standards. Someone is definitely losing money. Gambling is a familiar pastime among Tudor elites. Cards, dice, and betting can absorb hours. Henry himself is known to gamble, and royal accounts preserve payments and losses connected with games. This is useful evidence because financial records sometimes reveal leisure more clearly than formal chronicles do. A king may not record in his diary that he spent the evening losing at cards. An accountant is less sentimental. You watch one player place a wager. Another studies his hand. A third tries to look indifferent and fails magnificently. The cards are laid down. The winner smiles. The loser reaches for more coins. Human civilization has advanced considerably, yet this facial expression has probably not changed at all. You continue toward another table where dice are being thrown. The cubes bounce against the surface. A small crowd reacts. Dice games are simple enough to cross social boundaries, though the stakes vary enormously. A kitchen worker might gamble for a small amount in private. A nobleman can lose sums that would support a poorer household for months. The act is similar, the consequences are not. One courtier laughs as he loses, another does not. You decide that the second man may be taking entertainment incorrectly. Across the room, a dog lies near the fire. This one is larger than the small companion animal you saw near the king's private chambers. Its head rests between its paws. It appears thoroughly uninterested in cards. Dogs occupy many roles in court life. Some are hunting animals, some guard, some provide companionship. Small lapdogs may be treasured in private apartments, while larger hounds belong to the royal culture of hunting and field sport. Animals can also become gifts between elites, especially when they are valued for breeding, training, or rarity. A well-trained hunting dog may carry both emotional and practical importance. The dog lifts its head as someone drops a piece of food. Suddenly, philosophy ends, it stands. The food disappears, the animal returns to the fire. Perhaps this is the most efficient court career you've observed so far. A servant enters carrying drinks. Conversation rises. The musicians in the neighbouring room change pieces, somewhere farther away. Another group is preparing for dancing. You follow. The chamber here offers more open floor space. Several younger courtiers gather near one side. Clothing becomes part of the entertainment because dancing displays grace, posture, coordination, and expensive garments all at once. A court dance is social performance. You do not simply move to music. You reveal whether you have been properly educated, whether you understand etiquette, whether you can control your body, whether you know when to approach, retreat, bow, turn, and stop. The music begins. Pairs form. Movements are measured. No one launches into enthusiastic improvisation. That would certainly make the evening memorable, though perhaps only once. Different dances vary in speed and character. Some are stately and controlled, others are more energetic. Henry's earlier court had been famous for vigorous dancing, and skill in dance formed part of elite accomplishment. Even now, dancing remains a language of refinement. You watch a young gentleman miss a step. Only slightly, his partner corrects smoothly. Nobody reacts, that may be kindness, or everyone is storing the memory for later. Whitehall has taught you not to underestimate either possibility. The dance ends with carefully managed bows. Conversation resumes. A woman laughs behind a raised hand. A gentleman responds with something you cannot hear. The atmosphere feels lighter than the political corridors. Yet amusement is never entirely separate from court advancement. A dance partner can be socially significant. A card table can create familiarity. A hunting invitation can provide access. A shared joke can begin a friendship. Leisure helps build relationships that later affect patronage and politics. The border between entertainment and influence is extremely thin. You wander toward a smaller chamber where a storyteller or performer has gathered a modest audience. The tale is humorous. You catch only fragments: a foolish husband, a dishonest merchant, a donkey behaving more intelligently than either. The audience laughs at the appropriate moments. Storytelling remains a powerful form of entertainment in a world without cinema, television, or streaming. Professional entertainers may perform alongside musicians, fools, actors, or other specialists depending on occasion. Court festivities can become elaborate, especially during Christmas, diplomatic visits, weddings, or major celebrations. Masks, disguisings, pageants, tournaments, and dramatic spectacles combine costume, music, dance, architecture, symbolism, and political flattery. Henry's court has long enjoyed such display. The king does not merely watch spectacle, he has sometimes participated in it. Earlier in the reign, Henry famously appeared in disguises during court entertainments, sometimes entering as an unknown figure before dramatically revealing himself. There is something delightfully optimistic about a 6-foot monarch surrounded by attendants assuming nobody will recognize him because he changed clothes. Perhaps everyone agrees to be surprised. Court etiquette occasionally requires collaborative imagination. The storyteller finishes, applause follows, you move again. A board game waits on a side table. Pieces are arranged carefully. Chess is known and played, along with other table games. Games create quieter entertainment for people unwilling or unable to dance. They also provide another opportunity for competition. You watch two men studying a board. Neither speaks. One moves a piece, the other immediately responds. There is no money visible. That does not mean nothing is at stake. Pride has financed many long evenings. Near them sits a woman holding a small book. She is not playing. Perhaps she is reading poetry. Perhaps devotional material. Perhaps simply pretending to read while listening to everyone nearby. Court leisure includes quieter activities too. Reading, needlework, conversation, music practiced privately, walking in galleries or gardens when weather allows. Not every hour is filled with spectacle. That quieter rhythm is easy to lose when later accounts focus on banquets and tournaments. Researchers trying to reconstruct ordinary evenings at Tudor palaces face an uneven record. Exceptional entertainments generate detailed descriptions because they impress ambassadors and chroniclers. Routine amusement rarely receives the same attention, so the grand masque survives. The ordinary card game may disappear, yet most evenings are ordinary. Shocking speed. He will be arrested in June and executed in July. Standing here before those events fully unfold. Nobody possesses your hindsight. That is important. History gives later generations clean dates. Living people receive only hints. A colder greeting, a closed door, a delayed message. A patron suddenly avoided. The future approaches as atmosphere before it becomes fact. You walk toward the chapel. The air cools, candles burn. Someone bows, someone prays. England's religious transformation continues beyond these walls, but inside this space belief still contains habit, fear, comfort, loyalty, and uncertainty all at once. Later centuries will sort people into sharper categories: Catholic, Protestant, conservative, reformer. The individuals standing here may feel less certain. Some cling to old practices, some welcome new scripture, some support royal supremacy while disliking theological innovation. Some simply pray the prayers they have known since childhood. The speed and depth of religious change among ordinary English people during Henry's reign cannot be reduced to one simple pattern. Evidence differs sharply from region to region and household to household. Whitehall itself reflects that instability. Old forms remain. New authority governs them. You step outside the chapel and hear music from somewhere distant. The palace shifts again. Prayer becomes conversation. Conversation becomes laughter. A dog runs across the passage. It stops when it sees you. You stop too, for several seconds. Neither of you has a plan. Then the dog continues, a perfectly balanced diplomatic encounter. You move toward the sleeping chambers. Beds are being aired. A servant shakes a blanket. Another opens shutters. The night world you saw has disappeared. Pallets are pushed away. Curtains are drawn back. Chamber pots have been removed. Daylight restores social performance. People dress. Hair is arranged. Belts fastened. Shoes tied. The palace puts hierarchy back on. You think of the sleepers beneath these roofs last night. Gentlemen beneath expensive covers, servants on pallets, children beside nurses, guards remaining awake, shared rooms, cold noses, warm curtains, fleas with apparently republican views about social rank. Sleep briefly reduced everyone to breathing bodies. Morning rebuilds distinction. You continue toward the sanitation areas. Someone is carrying wastewater. A worker clears a drain. Fresh rushes are being spread elsewhere. None of this work announces itself. That is why it disappears so easily from popular memory when cleaning succeeds. You see cleanliness, not the cleaner. When cooking succeeds, you see dinner, not the scullion. When royal clothing succeeds, you see magnificence, not the hands that repaired the sleeve. Whitehall's hidden life is built on successful invisibility. You step back into the courtyard. A cart enters carrying supplies, firewood, perhaps grain, perhaps cloth. You cannot see everything beneath the covering. It does not matter. Something is arriving because something has been consumed. That cycle defines the palace. Inward, outward, food in, waste out, water in. Dirty water out, letters in, orders out, visitors in, rumours out. The king appears stationary at the centre, but everything around him moves. You look across the courtyard toward the roofs. Whitehall in Henry's reign will continue expanding and changing. Later monarchs will alter it again. Much of the palace you have walked through will eventually disappear. A catastrophic fire in 1698 will destroy most of the complex. Only fragments will survive into the modern landscape. That future makes the ordinary morning before you feel fragile. These corridors seem permanent to the people using them. They are not. Neither are the routines. Neither are the political arrangements. Neither are the people. But for now, nobody knows that. A servant carries bread through a doorway. A groom leads a horse. A clerk hurries with papers. A woman shakes dust from a cloth. A guard changes position beside the gate. The king's palace is alive, not because of stone, because of repetition, and after all the rooms you have crossed. That is what remains most strongly. Not Henry's jewels, not the expensive food, not the political fear, not even the magnificent architecture. You remember movement, hands passing dishes, feet climbing stairs, water being carried, beds being warmed, doors being watched, clothing being folded, firewood being stacked, messages moving from one person to another. Whitehall is made of people long before it is made of history. You walk toward the river one final time. The palace recedes behind you. From here, it becomes impressive again. Large, royal, distant. You could almost forget everything happening inside. But now you know better. Behind those walls, someone is sweeping, someone is hungry, someone is bored, someone is nervous about a rumour, someone is warming the king's room, someone is checking a horse, someone is laughing quietly with a friend, Someone is carrying another bucket of water upstairs, and the palace continues because they do. The Thames moves gently beside you now. The sounds begin to soften. The hammering from the workshops becomes distant. The calls from the landing blur into the background. Even the palace seems to lose its sharp edges as evening settles across the roofs. You no longer need to follow every servant. You no longer need to remember every doorway. The fires are being tended without you. The kitchens know what to prepare. The guards know where to stand. The laundresses will fold the linen. The clerks will finish their pages. The river will carry tomorrow's supplies toward the palace whether you're awake to see them or not. So you can let Whitehall continue without watching. Let the corridors grow quieter. Let the candles become small points of gold behind windows. Let the footsteps move farther away until they are only a soft rhythm beneath the sound of water. The people you met return to their rooms one by one. A cook wipes his hands. A groom closes a stable door. A maid places folded linen inside a chest. A page finally stops running, somewhere behind heavy curtains. Henry rests while the enormous household surrounding him settles into another night. Nothing requires you now. No petition waits in your hands. No bell calls you toward a chamber. No officer is checking whether you belong near the king. There is only the river beside you and the dark outline of the palace behind. You allow the distance to grow. Brick becomes shadow. Windows become faint light. Voices disappear. The busy Whitehall of 1540 becomes quiet enough to hold only memory, and if your thoughts are still moving, let them move like the Thames, slowly, without effort, passing one image at a time, a candle, a folded shirt, a warm loaf, a sleepy servant, a silent courtyard. Then let those images drift farther apart. Nothing needs to be solved tonight. History will still be there tomorrow. The palace can keep its secrets for a few more hours. You have walked its passages long enough. Now the doors close gently behind you. The river darkens. The last candle fades, and somewhere beyond the walls, hundreds of sleeping people breathe beneath the same Tudor night. Rest now, quietly, comfortably, and let Whitehall disappear into the dark.